Hello, my dear olive listener. Welcome to Insightful Vision, where curiosity gets cozy and science takes the scenic route to slumber. Tonight, we begin a journey not forward, but backward into the deep history of our planet. Our focus is a time long before people, long before dinosaurs, even long before trees. We're going back to a moment known as the Cambrian Explosion, when the oceans of Earth suddenly filled with an incredible variety of new life forms. Strange animals with spines and shells, eyes and claws. Creatures unlike anything we see today appeared in a burst of diversity that changed the course of evolution forever. It was not loud, not fiery, but an explosion of possibility. A moment when the living world expanded in ways that would echo all the way to us. Before we step fully into that ancient ocean, let me ask you something simple. Where are you listening from right now? Maybe you're lying in bed, lights dim, letting your thoughts settle after a long day. Maybe you've got your headphones in during a quiet morning, sipping your first cup of coffee. Or maybe you race somewhere in between on a pause between tasks looking for something gentle to occupy your mind. Wherever you are, I want you to imagine looking out your window at whatever you see there and then try to strip it away in your mind. No houses, no streets, no trees, no birds, no grass. Remove it all until only rock, sand, and open sky remain. Beneath that sky, picture a shallow sea stretching wide, warm water gently rippling under sunlight. That is where our story begins. If you find this sort of calm exploration soothing or simply a pleasant way to unwind while learning something new, I'd be grateful if you gave the video a like or maybe subscribed. It helps this little space reach others who might also enjoy drifting into the past this way. For now, let's move carefully into the ancient world. The Earth 540 million years ago was familiar in some ways, but alien in others. Continents existed, though not as we know them. They were smaller, fragmented, and arranged differently across the globe. Mountains rose and eroded. Rivers ran in the seas, and shallow oceans stretched across low-lying land. But the land itself was empty of life. No trees, no grass, no buzzing insects. If you stood on the shore, the silence would be striking. Wind across bare rock, waves rolling in, nothing else. Yet under the surface of those shallow seas, everything was changing. Before the Cambrian, life had already been present for billions of years, but it had remained mostly simple. Microbes ruled the planet. Sheets of bacterial mats covered seafloors. A few soft-bodied multicellular organisms floated and grazed in the water. These earlier creatures, part of what's called the Edibata, were unusual forms, sometimes shaped like discs or fronds. They lacked hard shells, teeth, or eyes. They lived quietly and left behind only faint impressions in the rock. Then around 541 million years ago, things shifted. Within a span of perhaps 20 million years, life diversified dramatically. Organisms developed skeletons and shells. They learned to burrow, to swim more actively, to hunt, and to hide. Eyes appeared, capable of detecting light and movement. Predators prowled the seas for the first time. What had been a quiet, relatively simple ecosystem turned into a dynamic, bustling community of creatures, all competing, all adapting, all inventing new ways to survive. The Cambrian explosion wasn't an instant, but in geological terms, it was sudden. Life had been relatively stable and slow to change for billions of years. Then, in this short window, new animal groups emerged in astonishing variety. Nearly all the major groups of animals we know today trace their roots back to this time. Aeropods, the ancestors of insects, spiders, and crabs. Mollusks, leading eventually to clams, squids, and snails. Echinoderms, the group that includes starfish and sea urchins. Even the earliest chordates, the lineage that would one day give rise to fish, reptiles, mammals, and eventually us. The stage was set and the cast was assembled. Why then? Why did life suddenly flourish in new directions? Scientists continue to debate, but several ideas rise again and again. Oxygen levels in the oceans had increased, providing more energy for metabolism and movement. Genetic innovations gave organisms new flexibility in their body designs. Ecological pressures like the rise of predators pushed prey to evolve defenses, and those defenses spurred further changes in predators. It was a cascade, each change feeding into the next. What had once been a world of simple, passive organisms became a world of interaction, conflict, and opportunity. Imagine being able to drift in one of those Cambrian seas. The water is warm, sunlight filters down, and the seafloor stretches beneath you, covered in rippling sand. Trilobites scuttle across the bottom, their segmented bodies armored, their compound eyes glinting. Worm-like creatures burrow into the sediment, leaving trails and tunnels. Above them swim odd forms with spines, tentacles, and frills. One animal, Hallucinia, crawls along on stubby legs, its back bristling with sharp spines for defense. Another, Obinia, glides by with 5 eyes perched on stalks and a flexible snout ending in a claw. Then suddenly, a larger shadow passes. Anomalous, one of the earliest apex predators, cruises through the water, its grasping appendages ready to snatch prey. It's a world both unsettling and fascinating, full of experiments in body shape and behavior. The land remains silent, lifeless rock under the sun, but beneath the surface, the drama of evolution is unfolding. Each adaptation sets the stage for another. Shells protect against bites, but stronger jaws evolve to crack them. Eyes allow for early detection, but stealth and speed evolve to outmaneuver vision. It is an arms race written in biology, and it will continue through every era that follows. The Cambrian is where it begins in earnest. Much of what we know about this time comes from rare fossil deposits where soft-bodied animals were preserved. The Burgess Shale in Canada and the Chongqing Formation in China hold fossils that show us not only the hard shells but also the delicate features of these early creatures. Gills, muscles, even traces of nervous systems. Without these remarkable sights, our view of the Cambrian would be limited. But with them, we see a vivid picture of life in its earliest burst of complexity. Even though it seems unimaginably far away, the Cambrian explosion matters deeply to us. The nervous systems that allow us to think, the skeletons that hold our bodies, the eyes that let us see, all have their origins in that long ago time. The strange forms that crawled and swam in those seas may look bizarre to us, but they are family, distant ancestors who carried forward the basic designs that life still uses. When you look at a crab, a snail, or even your own hand, you are seeing echoes of innovations first tried in the Cambrian. As we begin this story, let's not think of the Cambrian as something disconnected, sealed away in deep time. Think of it as a turning point in the same continuous history that leads directly to you and me. We are linked to those trilobites and those spiny worm-like creatures. We are part of the same long experiment. And tonight, as we settle in, we'll explore how it began, not with noise and fire, but with seas that quietly filled with life and forms the Earth had never seen before. If the Cambrian explosion feels like the sudden opening act of a play, then the long time before it was the hushed murmur of the audience settling into their seats, the stage dimly lit, the props in place, and the actors not yet in costume. For billions of years, Earth has carried life. But it was a quiet life, simple life, the kind that left almost no trace behind. To understand why the Cambrian explosion was so remarkable, we have to wander back further into the calm that preceded it. For most of its history before the Cambrian, Earth was dominated by microorganisms. Bacteria and archaea thrived in oceans, lakes, and soils. Those soils in those days were bare rock and mineral dust not covered by grass or forests. These microorganisms formed layered structures known as stromatolites, which you can still find in a few rare places today like Sharp Bay in Western Australia. In the Proterozoic Eon just before the Cambrian, stromatolites were far more common. Imagine shallow seas lined with them like vast underwater meadows. Their surfaces are sticky with colonies of cyanobacteria capturing sunlight and releasing oxygen as a byproduct. They were not dramatic to look at, but their work slowly reshaped the atmosphere and oceans in ways that would eventually allow complex animals to exist. The Proterozoic world stretched over 2 billion years, and for most of that time, life remained microscopic. There were milestones along the way. Around 2 billion years ago, eukaryotic cells appeared, cells with a nucleus and internal compartments. These were the ancestors of all plants, fungi, and animals. The leap from simple prokaryotic cells to more complex eukaryotes was one of the most important in the history of life. It allowed for greater diversity in form and function, the ability to grow larger, and eventually the potential for multicellularity. Multicellular organisms began to appear around 600 million years ago in the late Proterozoic period. The Ediacaran period, the final slice of time before the Cambrian, hosted some of the first communities of large multicellular life. The creatures of the Ediacaran seas are among the strangest ever known. They included forms shaped like discs, fronds, and quilted mattresses. Some lay flat on the seafloor. Others rose up like soft corals swaying gently in the currents. They had no shells, no hard skeletons, no obvious mouths, eyes, or limbs. Paleontologists still debate how to classify them. Were they early animals related to modern sponges or jellyfish? Were they a completely separate experiment in multicellular life that later vanished? Their fossils are imprinted in fine sediments, delicate impressions that reveal outlines of a few details. Picture one of those ancient seafloors. The water is still, light filters down, and the surface of the sediment is covered with microbial mats, sticky sheets of bacteria. Resting on those mats are the Edi organisms, soft and unmoving. Some may have absorbed nutrients directly from the water. Others may have grazed gently on the microbial mats. They lacked the energy to swim or burrow. They were passive forms in a quiet ecosystem, more like living furniture than animals as we know them. For tens of millions of years, that was the state of the Earth seas. Quiet, still, filled with strange, soft-bodied organisms that did little more than exist. There were no predators, no hunters, no chases through the water. Evolution was proceeding, but slowly, cautiously, in simple designs. Geologically, the Earth itself was also different. The continents were gathered into a supercontinent called Rodinia for part of the Proterozoic, though by the Edi it had broken apart into smaller land masses. Glaciers had once covered large portions of the planet in an event known as Snowball Earth when ice may have reached down to the equator. Recovery from those ice ages may have helped set the stage for the rise of multicellular life. As glaciers melted, nutrients flooded into the oceans, fueling blooms of microorganisms and altering chemistry in ways that may have encouraged new evolutionary steps. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere had been rising slowly thanks to photosynthetic microbes. But in the Proterozoic, they remained lower than today. By the late Edi and early Cambrian, oxygen levels reached thresholds that allowed larger and more active animals to exist. Without that increase, the Cambrian explosion might not have been possible at all. One of the puzzles of the Edi world is why those soft-bodied organisms largely disappeared. With the arrival of the Cambrian, it's possible that they simply could not compete with the new animals that evolved shells, skeletons, and active behaviors. In a world of passive grazers, everything worked in a kind of quiet equilibrium. But once predators appeared, those without defenses were suddenly vulnerable. The Cambrian explosion did not just bring new body forms. It brought new ecological roles: predators, prey, burrowers, swimmers. The passive Edi organisms may have been swept aside by the new complexity. If you imagine drifting back through time to the pre-Cambrian world, it might feel eerily peaceful. No fish darting past, no clams buried in the sand, no starfish crawling over rocks, just microbial mats, soft fronds, and disc-like organisms resting in the sediment. The water would be calm, the ecosystem simple, the pace of life slow. Evolution had not yet discovered claws, teeth, or shells. It had not yet invented nervous systems that could process complex movement. It had not yet sparked the competitive arms race that would characterize later periods. And yet, beneath the calm surface, the ingredients for change were building. Genetic toolkits were evolving that would allow body plans to diversify. Oxygen was increasing, giving more energy to cells. Nutrients were cycling in new ways. The pieces were being laid out quietly like props behind the curtain, waiting for the signal to begin the performance. When the Cambrian explosion began, it did not come from nowhere. It was rooted in the long calm prelude of the Proterozoic and Edi, when life experimented in soft, strange forms and the Earth itself slowly shifted into conditions that could support something more. To understand the drama of the Cambrian, you have to appreciate the stillness that came before, because it is the contrast between the quiet seas of the Ediacaran and the bustling ecosystems of the Cambrian that makes the explosion so striking. The fossils of the Aditi are rare, preserved only in special conditions, but they give us glimpses of that prelude. Impressions of Dickinsonia with its ribbed oval body, shapes of Carnaiscus with its fawn-like stalk rising above the seafloor, mysterious forms that seem almost plant-like yet live in the sea without roots or leaves. They remind us that evolution does not move in straight lines. Many experiments happen along the way, some successful, others ending quietly without descendants. In the calm before the Cambrian, the Earth was already alive, But it was a world of soft silence. No buzzing, no snapping jaws, no bursts of speed, just simple forms resting in shallow seas, waiting for what was to come. And when the ship finally arrived, it would be so dramatic that paleontologists 500 million years later would give it a name: the Cambrian Explosion. When people hear the phrase Cambrian Explosion, they often imagine something sudden like a firework lighting up the sky, or a volcano erupting in an instant. In truth, the awakening of life during this period unfolded over millions of years. It was not a moment, but a transformation. A steady surge of innovation and complexity that filled the oceans with creatures unlike any that had come before. To us it may seem abrupt, but to the earth it was a gradual stirring, a long stretch of experimentation that rewrote the rules of survival. In those early Cambrian seas, the first thing you would notice is movement. Before this time, most organisms simply rested on the seafloor or floated passively. With the arrival of new body structures came a different world. Animals began to burrow through sediments, disturbing the layers of microbial mats that had dominated seafloors. For hundreds of millions of years, trails and tunnels appeared, left behind by creatures testing new behaviors. These were not just marks in the sand. They were signs that life had become active, that organisms were beginning to engineer their own environments. The seafloor, once static and quiet, was now being stirred by the movements of its inhabitants. This new mobility was tied to changes in anatomy. Muscles, nervous systems, and skeletons made movement more efficient. A soft-bodied creature can only do so much, but add a protective shell, jointed limbs, or even the simplest eyes, and suddenly the possibilities expand. The Cambrian awakening was not about one innovation, but about many arriving together. Hard parts allowed animals to defend themselves and to anchor muscles for stronger movement. Nervous systems coordinated those movements with greater precision. Sensory organs gave information about the world beyond touch. With each step, organisms became more capable and ecosystems became more complex. Imagine looking across the seafloor at that time. Trilobites scuttled in groups, their segmented bodies glinting with hard exoskeletons. Each carried compound eyes, able to detect changes in light and motion. Nearby, tiny worms burrowed and twisted beneath the sediment, carving networks that changed the way water and nutrients flowed through the seafloor. In the water above, small shelled creatures drifted, their bodies encased in protection that would deter all. But the most determined predator, and swimming between them, were new and unfamiliar shapes. Some armed with spines, others with grasping limbs. Each represented a new approach to living in the sea. Predation became a powerful force during this time. For the first time in history, animals hunted one another in earnest. Anomalocaris, often described as one of the earliest apex predators, swam through the water using flexible lows along its sides. Its eyes were large and complex, far more advanced than anything seen before. In front of its mouth extended a pair of grasping appendages, perfect for snatching trilobites or other prey. At the center of its head was a circular mouth lined with overlapping plates, capable of crushing shells. To live in the Cambrian seas meant living with the possibility of being hunted, and that pressure pushed animals to adapt quickly. Eyes spread across the animal kingdom during this time. The ability to detect light, shapes, and movement gave prey a chance to escape and predators an edge in catching them. Vision likely fueled the evolutionary arms race. A creature that could see better, could survive longer, pass on its traits, and give rise to descendants with even sharper vision. Over time, this led to the variety of eyes we know today. Compound eyes in insects and crustaceans, camera-like eyes in vertebrates, and all the variations in between. The spark of vision in the Cambrian changed life forever. Shells and skeletons were another crucial development. A hard surface offered defense, but it also provided structure. Muscles could attach more effectively, allowing stronger movement. Animals could grow larger without collapsing under their own weight. For trilobites, the exoskeleton became a defining feature, giving them protection and support. For mollusks, shells provided a barrier against predators. The fossil record became richer as these hard parts were preserved more readily than the soft bodies of earlier organisms. With shells and skeletons, life left a clearer mark in stone, a record we can still study hundreds of millions of years later. Not all the Cambrian creatures were predators or armored defenders. Many filled other roles in the new ecosystems. Some grazed on microbial mats or detritus on the seafloor. Others filtered food from the water, drawing in currents through simple openings or gill-like structures. Burrowers reshaped sediments, altering the chemistry of the ocean floor. Each role created opportunities for others. Predators needed prey. Grazers needed mats to feed on. Filter feeders needed plankton in the water. The interactions between these roles turned the seas into networks of relationships, a web of life more intricate than anything the planet had hosted before. The diversity of body forms during this period is striking. Hallucinea with its spines and tiny legs looked like a creature from a dream. Upperbenia carried 5 eyes and a flexible snout with a claw at the end. Waxia was armored with scales and spines. Mela had delicate spines and feathery limbs, leaving behind fossil impressions so detailed that paleontologists can study individual bristles. Each of these forms seems unusual to us, but in the Cambrian seas, they were part of the ordinary landscape. Life was trying out possibilities, many of which would not last beyond the period, but each an experiment that expanded the range of what was possible. The Cambrian awakening was not only about individual animals, but about ecosystems. The presence of predators forced prey to burrow deeper or develop stronger shells. The activities of burrowers changed the availability of nutrients and sediments, which in turn influenced what could live there. Reefs began to appear, built by early sponges and other filter-feeding organisms, providing habitats for countless smaller creatures. For the first time, the oceans had complexity, not just in the bodies of animals, but in the way they interacted, shaping their environments and each other. From a geological perspective, the Cambrian was also a time of change. Continents drifted across the globe. Some gathered near the equator, providing warm, shallow seas that were perfect habitats for early animals. Sea levels rose and fell, creating new environments and isolating populations. These shifting conditions encouraged diversity as animals adapted to different ecological natures. The Cambrian world was dynamic, not just biologically, but geologically. When we look at the fossil record of this period, we see more than bones and shells. We see a story of awakening, of life discovering new ways to exist. The Burgess Shale fossils in Canada capture not only the hard parts, but the soft tissues of animals, giving us vivid details of creatures like Opabenia and Hallucinea. In China, the Xinjiang fossils reveal equally rich communities, showing that this awakening was global, not confined to one part of the world. Together, these sites give us a window into the moment when life became varied, active, and complex. It is tempting to think of the Cambrian explosion as a sudden event because of the sharp contrast it provides in the fossil record. Before only faint impressions of soft bodies, after a flood of skeletons, shells, and strange forms. But in reality it was a process, a slow stirring that gathered momentum over millions of years. From the quiet prelude of the Eddy came the active awakening of the Cambrian. And once it began, life would never return to the simplicity of before. The Cambrian awakening is not just an ancient curiosity. It set the stage for everything that followed. The major animal groups we know today began here. The ecological roles of predator, prey, filter feeder, burrower, and grazer were established here. The evolutionary arms race that still drives adaptation today began here. Every ecosystem since has carried echoes of that first awakening. When you watch fish darting through a coral reef, crabs scuttling across a tide pool, or even birds hunting insects in the air, you're seeing the legacy of innovations born in the Cambrian seas. For us, looking back, the Cambrian awakening can feel distant and abstract, but it is part of our own history. The earliest chordates of this time were the faint beginning of the lineage that would one day produce vertebrates. From those small, simple animals eventually came fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and humans. Our own nervous systems, our eyes, our skeletons, all trace back to the period when evolution discovered new possibilities and pushed them forward. The awakening of the Cambrian was a moment of creativity on a planetary scale. Not everything survived. Many body plans disappeared, leaving no descendants. But the experiments that worked became the foundation of the modern animal world. The strange seas of 500 million years ago may look alien to us, but they are also familiar because they are the source of the diversity we see today. The Cambrian was not the end of the story, only the beginning of a new one. A story that would carry forward through ages of change and into the present. When we imagine the ancient Earth of the Cambrian period, it helps to begin not with the animals themselves, but with the stage they lived on. The oceans of the time were not uniform expanses of deep dark water. They were dominated by vast stretches of shallow seas, broad continental shelves where sunlight could penetrate to the seafloor, and warmth encouraged life to thrive. These shallow seas were the cradle of the Cambrian Explosion, and the soft sediments that blanketed their floors became the canvas on which evolution painted its first great variety of forms. The geography of Earth then was very different from the one we know. Continents were smaller, often grouped near the equator, which gave them warmer climates and wide submerged edges. Sea levels were high, flooding low-lying areas and creating broad marine platforms. Instead of the deep open oceans, where modern whales and tuna roam, most life was concentrated in these sunlit shallows. It was here that photosynthetic organisms flourished, producing oxygen and forming the base of food chains. It was here that burrowers and grazers disturbed sediments, reshaping their environment. And it was here that predators began their experiments in pursuit and capture. Imagine standing on the shoreline of a Cambrian continent. There is no grass beneath your feet, no sound of insects, no trees swaying above you. Just bare rock and sand, the occasional ripple of a wave, and the vast empty land behind you. Step forward into the water and things begin to change. At first, it is still quiet, the water lapping against your legs. But if you wade deeper and dip below the surface, the scene transforms. Sunlight streams down, illuminating rippled sand. And across that sand crawl trilobites, small and large, their many legs working together in steady rhythm. Worm-like animals squirm beneath the sediment, leaving winding trails. Tiny shelled creatures rest on the surface, filtering food from the water. It is not yet the bustling reef of later ages, but it is no longer a silent seafloor either. These shallow seas were ideal for early life in part because of their chemistry. Water in constant contact with the atmosphere allowed oxygen to diffuse more readily. Nutrients washed in from eroding continents carried by rivers and streams provided the raw materials for growth. Warmth near the equator kept conditions stable and energetic. In these places, evolution found the perfect balance of ingredients for experimentation. The soft sediments of the seafloor also played a crucial role. For billions of years, seafloors have been covered in microbial mats, sticky layers of bacteria that smoothed over disturbances and left the environment stable but stagnant. During the Cambrian, animals began to burrow into those mats, tearing them apart and mixing sediments in new ways. This process, called bioturbation, fundamentally changed marine ecosystems. Oxygen could now penetrate deeper into sediments. Nutrients could be released and cycled more effectively, and habitats became more dynamic. What had once been a flat microbial carpet became a three-dimensional environment with tunnels, burrows, and pockets. Each new disturbance created opportunities for new life. In this way, the animals of the Cambrian were not only adapting to their environments, they were creating them. The shallow seas became places of engineering where the actions of countless small creatures reshaped the physical and chemical landscape. Burrowers turned sediments, grazers cleared microbial mats, filter feeders clarified water, and predators stirred communities into motion. These interactions gave the shallow seas a complexity that had never existed before. It is worth imagining the perspective of a trilobite, one of the most successful groups of the Cambrian. With compound eyes scanning its surroundings, it scuttles across rippled sand, searching for food. The seafloor is not empty, but dotted with burrow openings, worm tracks, and scattered shells. Above, suspended particles drift in the current, some edible, others debris. A shadow passes and the trilobite freezes. Is it a predator? A Anomalurus glides overhead, its large eyes focused, its appendages flexing. For the trilobite, survival depends on awareness and quick reaction. The shallow sea is not just a gentle environment. It is also a place of constant risk. Reefs were beginning to form in these seas as well, though they were not yet the coral reefs we know today. Early reefs were built by sponges, archaeoids, and other filter-feeding organisms. Their skeletons provided hard surfaces where other creatures could anchor themselves. These structures created habitats with more variety, offering crevices for hiding and elevated positions for feeding. Though small compared to modern reefs, they marked the start of a trend that would continue through Earth's history. Animals shaping their environment to create new opportunities for life. Fossil evidence tells us much of what we know about these shallow seas. Sites like the Burgess Shale capture not only the hard shells of animals, but their soft tissues, revealing how they lived in these environments. The fine sediments that buried them preserved delicate limbs, gills, and even traces of internal organs. In other places, trace fossils, burrows, tracks, and tunnels tell us about behaviors. The simple act of an animal moving through the sediment left marks that lasted 500 million years, giving us glimpses into how life interacted with the seafloor. The cradle of the Cambrian was not uniform. Different shallow seas supported different communities. Some were dominated by trilobites, others by small-shelled brachiopods or mollusks. In some areas, predators like anomalicas were common. In others, filter feeders formed dense colonies. This patchwork of ecosystems shows that even in its earlier stages, animal life was diverse and specialized. Adaptations varied depending on local conditions, and the spread of shallow seas across the globe ensured that evolution had many laboratories to work in simultaneously. It is striking to realize how much of life's early complexity depended on sediments and sunlight. Without soft seafloors to burrow into, many behaviors would not have evolved. Without shallow waters, where sunlight encouraged photosynthesis and warm stabilized conditions, the energy for such diversity might not have been available. The Cambrian explosion was not only about animals. It was about the environments that nurtured them. The seas and sediments of that time were not passive backgrounds, but active players in the story. The creatures that lived in these shallow seas would leave legacies lasting millions of years. Trilobites would dominate marine ecosystems for nearly 300 million years, diversifying into countless forms. Mollusks would continue to develop shells of many shapes from coiled to flat to spiny. Worm-like bearers would give rise to complex lineages still present today. Sponges and reef builders would refine the art of constructing habitats. Each lineage carried forward the lessons of the Cambrian, building on the opportunities created in those shallow waters. Looking back, it is easy to see the Cambrian explosion as a sudden leap. But when you focus on the environment, you realize it was also a story of place. The shallow seas provided space, sunlight, oxygen, and nutrients. The soft sediments offered a surface that could be reshaped and colonized. Together, they created conditions where innovation could thrive. Without them, the awakening of life might have looked very different or perhaps not occurred at all. When we walk along modern coastlines and look into tide pools or shallow lagoons, we are seeing echoes of the ancient cradle. The animals are different. The chemistry has changed, but the principle is the same. Shallow seas remain some of the most productive ecosystems on Earth, filled with diversity and activity. They are still cradles of life, just as they were 500 million years ago when the first great burst of animal diversity stirred in the sediments and sunlight of the Cambrian world. When we talk about the Cambrian explosion, it's easy to focus only on the animals themselves. The sudden burst of trilobites, the strange shapes of hallucinia, the looming shadow of Anomalocaris, or the delicate impressions of soft-bodied creatures captured in ancient shale. But behind every evolutionary leap lies a set of conditions that made it possible. And one of the most important of those conditions was the air and water of the planet. To put it simply, without oxygen at the right levels, the Cambrian explosion might never have happened at all. Oxygen is one of those things so constant in our daily lives that we rarely think about it. We breathe in, we breathe out, and the cycle repeats without conscious thought. But in Earth's history, oxygen has not always been abundant nor evenly distributed. For billions of years after life first appeared, oxygen was scarce. Early life survived in anoxic environments, relying on chemical pathways that did not require it. Then around a point 4 billion years ago, photosynthetic microbes began producing oxygen as a byproduct of their metabolism. This event, known as the Great Oxidation Event, changed the chemistry of the planet. Oxygen builds up in the atmosphere and oceans, though slowly, unevenly, and often with setbacks. For much of the Proterozoic eon, oxygen remained relatively low, enough for some simple multicellular life, but not enough to support large active animals. In the late Ediacaran, as multicellular organisms began to appear, oxygen levels were rising, but still fluctuating. It was only as the Cambrian began that conditions stabilized in a way that supported sustained growth and complexity. Oxygen is fuel for metabolism. With more oxygen, animals could build larger bodies, support more active movement, and evolve more complex behaviors. Without it, life would have remained limited to small, slow, and simple forms. Think of oxygen as the energy currency of evolution. A creature with only minimal oxygen available cannot afford to run fast, to build armor, or power complex nervous systems. But as oxygen levels increased, the evolutionary bank account grew, and organisms could suddenly spend that wealth on new adaptations. Muscles became stronger, eyes more complex, metabolisms faster. In the Cambrian seas, oxygen was not just a gas dissolved in water. It was permission to experiment, to try new ways of living, to expand the boundaries of what life could be. This does not mean that oxygen alone caused the Cambrian explosion, but it was a critical enabler. Predation, for example, requires energy. A hunter must move quickly, pursue prey, and process food rapidly. Without higher oxygen levels, predators like anomalous would have been impossible. Likewise, prey that relied on swimming away or burrowing deeply would not have had the energy reserves to do so. The arms race of predator and prey, which drove so much diversity, needed oxygen as its underlying fuel. Evidence for this connection comes from the fossil record, and from geochemical studies. Rocks from the Cambrian period contain signals of rising oxygen levels, and the distribution of fossils shows that animals thrived, especially in areas where oxygen was abundant. In regions where oxygen remained low, life was sparse or absent. This patchiness suggests that oxygen was still a limiting factor, and that the explosion of diversity happened where conditions were right. To picture how important this was, imagine a shallow Cambrian sea with varying oxygen levels. In one part, oxygen is plentiful. Trilobites crawl actively across the seafloor. Worms burrow through sediments. Filter feeders wave their appendages in the current, and predators patrol the waters above. In another part, only a few km away, oxygen levels drop. The water is murkier, the seafloor quieter, the diversity much lower. The same planet, the same time period, but vastly different outcomes depending on chemistry. As oxygen became more stable and widespread, ecosystems grew more robust. Animals could colonize more areas, niches multiplied, and diversity increased. This was not an overnight change, but over millions of years. Oxygen availability shaped where life could thrive and how far it could push its experiments. The Cambrian explosion was not just a biological event, it was a chemical one, a shift in the very breath of the planet that made everything else possible. There's also a link between oxygen and the appearance of skeletons and shells. Building hard parts requires energy not only to construct but to carry. Without enough oxygen, soft-bodied forms dominate as they had in the Eddy. With oxygen in greater supply, animals could afford the metabolic cost of mineralized skeletons. Once shells and skeletons appeared, they provided protection, structure, and new opportunities for body design. And this in turn left a more durable fossil record, which is part of why the Cambrian looks like such a sudden leap. But beneath the record lies the chemical story of oxygen rising to levels that allowed those shells to exist in the first place. It is interesting to think about how fragile this balance was. Oxygen levels that are too low limit complexity, but levels that are too high can also cause problems, increasing the risk of fire or oxidative stress. The Cambrian world seems to have struck a balance with enough oxygen to fuel innovation, but not so much as to destabilize systems. That balance became the foundation for animal life as we know it. From a modern perspective, we can see the echoes of this relationship everywhere. Our own bodies rely on oxygen to power every cell. The hemoglobin in our blood is a finely tuned system for capturing and transporting it. Our brains, hungry for energy, consume oxygen constantly to keep neurons firing. This dependence began in the Cambrian, where nervous systems and active bodies first took shape under the new availability of oxygen. The gentle gift of oxygen was not just about breathing. It was about thinking, moving, and evolving. When we walk through a forest today and take a deep breath, it is easy to forget that this invisible gas was once scarce, that it had to be built up slowly by microbes over billions of years, and that its abundance at just the right time made possible the diversity of animals around us. In the Cambrian, the balance arrived, and life seized the opportunity. Trilobites armored themselves. Predators prowled, burrowers reshaped sediments, and nervous systems sparked with new activity. Oxygen did not create those forms, but it gave them the energy to exist. Geologists and paleontologists still debate the exact timing and levels of oxygen during this period, Some evidence suggests a stepwise rise with pulses of oxygen, encouraging bursts of diversification. Others suggest a more gradual increase that reached a tipping point at the start of the Cambrian. Either way, the pattern is clear. Where oxygen increased, life followed. Where it was lacking, ecosystems remained sparse. Imagine the Cambrian world again, drifting through its shallow seas. Above, the sunlight warms the water around you. Trilobites move purposefully, their compound eyes catching glimmers of motion. Worms burrow energetically, stirring sediments into clouds that drift in the current. A predator glides past, scanning with large eyes, appendages flexing in anticipation. None of this could happen without oxygen diffused into every cell, fueling muscles, nerves, and movements. The gift is invisible, but its effects are everywhere. It is worth noting that not all animals of the Cambrian relied on oxygen to the same degree. Some could tolerate low levels, living in quieter corners of the ocean where oxygen was scarce. Others required more and thrived in the best ventilated areas. This variation itself encouraged diversity as species adapted to different oxygen environments, carving niches across the seafloor and water column. Oxygen not only fueled life, it also shaped where and how it spread. Looking back, we can see that the Cambrian explosion was not a single cause, but a convergence of many. Oxygen was one of those and perhaps the most fundamental. Without it, the arms race of predator and prey could not begin. Without it, shells and skeletons would have remained rare. Without it, nervous systems and eyes would have stayed small and simple. The story of the Cambrian is the story of oxygen as much as it is the story of trilobites and anomalids. And yet it is easy to overlook. Fossils give us shapes, sediments give us context, but oxygen leaves no skeleton of its own. We read its history in isotopes and chemical traces, subtle signs in ancient rocks. It is a reminder that life is always tied to its environment, that what we breathe and what we swim through are as much a part of evolution as genes and bodies. As the Cambrian continued, oxygen remained a silent partner, sustaining the diversity it had helped unleash. The shallow seas became busier, the sea floors more disturbed, the water columns more filled with movement. The gentle gift of oxygen lingered in every breath, every flick of a trilobite's limb, every strike of a predator's appendage. Without it, the cradle of animal life would have remained empty. With it, the planet stirred into the richness we still live in today. One of the most striking differences between the quiet EDCs and the bustling Cambrian oceans was the sudden appearance of animals with shells and skeletons. Before the Cambrian, life had been soft-bodied and fragile, preserved in the fossil record only under rare and special conditions. But during the Cambrian, the seafloor and water column filled with creatures that carried hard exteriors, protective layers that not only changed the course of evolution, but also gave us the fossil evidence that makes the explosion so visible. These shells and skeletons were not built overnight. They were crafted by countless small steps, the result of tiny architects learning to build with minerals, leaving behind durable traces of their presence. To appreciate the significance of this change, it helps to imagine what came before. Picture an Ediacaran seafloor with quilt-like forms of Dickinsonia resting passively on microbial mats, fawn-like Chariodiscus swaying gently, and soft cushion-shaped organisms pressed into the sediment. If a predator had existed, which they largely did not, these animals would have had little defense. Their bodies would have torn easily, and their impressions in the fossil record would vanish with the slightest disturbance. The ecosystem was passive and the organisms within it were vulnerable. Now step into the Cambrian. The scene changes dramatically. Small-shelled animals cover the sand. Trilobites scuttle with armored bodies. Mollusc-like creatures carry shells, and spiny forms like waxia crawl across the surface with scales for protection. Predators prowl overhead, but for the first time in Earth's history, prey have defenses that force attackers to work harder. The invention of shells and skeletons shifted the balance, creating an evolutionary arms race that drove diversity forward. At its core, a shell or skeleton is simply a way to make use of minerals in the environment. Seawater is filled with calcium, carbonate, silica, and other compounds. Early animals developed biochemical pathways that allowed them to extract and deposit these minerals into structures outside or inside their bodies. The earlier skeletons were probably small spicules and sponges, tiny rods of silica that provided support. From there, animals expanded the technique, building larger and more elaborate structures. Shells encased soft tissue, exoskeletons encased entire bodies, and internal skeletons began to form within some lineages. The advantages were clear. A shell provided protection against attack, but also structure for muscles to attach, making movement more efficient. An exoskeleton allowed animals to grow large without collapsing under their own weight. Skeletons provided stability, allowing new body plans to evolve. With these innovations, animals could not only survive better, but also expand into new natures, digging deeper burrows, swimming with more power, and resisting predators with new confidence. Trilobites became one of the most iconic examples of this trend. Their exoskeletons were made of calcium carbonate, segmented into repeating sections that gave them both protection and flexibility. They could roll up into a ball much like modern pill bugs, hiding their vulnerable undersides. Their shells grew in stages, molted as the animal expanded, leaving behind countless fossil fragments that fill Cambrian rock layers. Trilobites were not the only ones experimenting. Brachiopods, animals that look somewhat like clams, though unrelated to them, built sturdy shells and anchored themselves to the seafloor. Mollusk ancestors developed shells of varied shapes, coiled, domed, or spiny. Each lineage of tiny architects added to the growing architectural diversity of the oceans. The rise of shells and skeletons also transformed the fossil record. Soft-bodied organisms leave faint impressions at best, requiring special preservation conditions like those of the Burgess Shale. But shells fossilize readily. They litter ancient seafloors, compact into limestone, and persist across vast stretches of time. When paleontologists study Cambrian rocks, the abundance of fossilized shells marks the period as a sudden flowering of life. In truth, life was diversifying in many ways, but it was the skeleton builders who left the clearest evidence. They are why we see the Cambrian explosion so vividly today. But why did animals start building hard parts at this particular time? Several explanations have been proposed. Rising oxygen levels provided the energy to support mineralization. Ecological pressures, especially the rise of predators, created incentives for defense. Genetic toolkits evolved that allowed more complex body structures, and chemistry played its role, too. Changes in seawater composition during the late Proterozoic and early Cambrian may have made calcium and carbonate more available, tipping the balance towards skeleton building. It was not a single cause, but a convergence of conditions that encouraged animals to invest in mineral architecture. From an evolutionary standpoint, the arms race of predator and prey was a powerful driver. Once one species developed a shell, others followed suit, either to defend themselves or to better attack the armored forms. Predators developed stronger jaws, piercing appendages, and crushing plates. Prey responded with thicker shells, spines, and the ability to burrow deeper. Each adaptation by one group spurred counter-adaptations by another. This feedback loop pushed evolution into new directions, ensuring that the Cambrian explosion was not just about more species, but about more variety in form and function. The ecological impact of shells went beyond a fence. Shells and skeletons created new habitats. As animals died, their hard parts accumulated on the seafloor, forming rubble that provided surfaces for other organisms to cling to. Early reefs incorporated the remains of skeleton builders, adding strength and variety. The seafloor became rougher, more textured, and more varied. This structural complexity increased biodiversity by providing more niches. Tiny architects were not only protecting themselves but also reshaping their ecosystems for others. The invention of skeletons also paved the way for larger body sizes. Without structural support, animals remained small and flat, limited by diffusion for moving oxygen and nutrients. With skeletons, animals could grow larger, circulate fluids internally, and develop specialized organs. Nervous systems could expand, muscles could become more powerful, and senses could sharpen. Skeletons made it possible for animals to explore the potential of size and complexity. When we look at fossils from the Cambrian, we see an array of architectural experiments. Some shells were smooth and rounded, others spiny and jagged. Some exoskeletons were thin and flexible, others thick and rigid. Some skeletons supported external armor, others reinforced internal structures. Not all of these designs would last, but together they illustrate the creativity of evolution at this time. Each lineage of tiny architects was testing what worked. building with minerals in ways that suited its survival. The emergence of skeletons also highlights the role of geology and biology. The minerals used in shells were not invented by animals. They were taken from seawater, products of the earth itself. Evolution discovered how to borrow from the planet's chemistry and turn it into protection and structure. Life in Earth intertwined more deeply with biology shaping geology and geology shaping biology. Shells built from calcium carbonate eventually compacted into limestone, altering the rock cycle. Skeletons buried in sediments altered carbon storage. The tiny architects were reshaping the entire system of the planet, not just their own survival. It is easy to overlook how revolutionary this was. To us, shells seem ordinary, something you find on a beach or see in an aquarium. But before the Cambrian, the idea of an animal carrying a mineralized structure was radical. It was as if life discovered how to borrow stone and wear it as a suit. That one innovation opened doors to countless possibilities. From trilobite armor to the bones in our own bodies, even today, the legacy of those Cambrian architects surrounds us. The shells of clams and snails, the skeletons of corals, the bones of vertebrates, all trace back to those first experiments in building with minerals. Our own skeletons are a continuation of the same story. The calcium in our bones, the structural support that lets us stand, move, and breathe, is the inheritance of tiny architects who figured out 500 million years ago how to build with the chemistry of seawater. The Cambrian Explosion is remembered for its diversity of forms, but much of the diversity was made possible by skeletons. They allow for new shapes, new strategies, and new ecosystems. They gave predators something to bite, prey something to resist, and paleontologists something to study. The rise of shells and skeletons was not a minor detail. It was a foundation for the animal world that followed. As the Cambrian continued, skeleton builders flourished. Trilobites multiplied into countless varieties. Brachipods covered seafloors. Mollusks refined their shells. Spiny creatures like Waxia added armor. The oceans became noisy with architecture, not in sound, but in structure, filled with animals encased in their own inventions. These were the tiny architects of evolution, building not with wood or stone, but with the minerals of the sea, leaving behind fossils that still tell their story today. In the story of life's awakening during the Cambrian, few innovations were as transformative as the ability to see. Before this period, animals may have sensed light and dark, perhaps responding to the faint glow of the sun above or the shifting shadows of deeper water. But true eyes, complex organs capable of detecting shapes, movement, and detail had not yet appeared in any abundance. Then during the Cambrian, vision spread across the animal kingdom. Compound eyes and trilobites, large camera-like eyes, and predators like anomalies, and countless variations in between filled the seas with creatures that could not only move and defend themselves, but for the first time could look upon the world around them. To understand why this mattered so much, it helps to imagine life before eyes. In a dim Precambrian ocean, most animals relied on touch, on chemical cues, or on passive drifting. A creature might sense a gradient of nutrients in the water, follow a chemical trail, or react when touched. Life moves slowly, feeling its way rather than observing. Predators were scarce. Prey were defenseless, and the pace of existence was steady but limited. Then with the arrival of eyes, the tempo changed. Suddenly, predators could spot prey from a distance. Prey could see predators coming and react before being touched. The environment was no longer only something to feel, but something to watch. This one innovation changed the rules of survival. Trilobites were among the earliest animals to possess sophisticated eyes. Their compound eyes, built of dozens or hundreds of individual lenses, gave them a mosaic view of their surroundings. Each lens was made of callite, a mineral that is preserved beautifully in fossils, allowing paleontologists to study their structure in remarkable detail. With these eyes, trilobites could detect movement across the seafloor, spot approaching predators, or navigate through shifting light and shadow. Their compound vision did not produce sharp images like ours, but it was excellent at detecting motion, a crucial ability in a world where danger could arrive quickly. Anomalous, the great predator of the Cambrian, carried some of the most advanced eyes of its time. Fossils show that its eyes were large, stalked, and highly complex, possibly containing thousands of individual lenses. This level of visual sophistication would have given Anomalocaris a huge advantage, allowing it to track prey in detail and pursue with accuracy. Imagine being a small trilobite scuttling across the seafloor. Without vision, you might not notice the shadow passing overhead until it was too late. But with eyes, you could see it coming, freeze or dart into a burrow. The predator-prey relationship was transformed by sight. Each side pushed to adapt in response to the other. The arrival of vision also changed behaviors. Animals could now coordinate movement in groups, following one another more effectively. They could seek out habitats with better lighting or avoid places where shadows hinted at danger. They could distinguish between surfaces, textures, and distances in ways impossible without eyes. Even simple forms of vision created new layers of ecological interaction, each one adding complexity to the Cambrian world. Fossil evidence from the Burgess Shale and Changjiang deposits shows a range of eye structures during this time. Some were tiny clusters of lenses, little more than light detectors. Others were large and intricate, capable of forming images. This variety suggests that eyes evolved multiple times in different lineages, each exploring the possibilities of light detection. Evolution often reuses solutions, and in the Cambrian, vision was one of the most repeated innovations. It was too valuable not to spread. Eyes also had profound evolutionary consequences beyond the immediate arms race. The development of vision encouraged the growth of nervous systems. Processing visual information requires a brain capable of integrating signals, distinguishing patterns, and responding quickly. As eyes grew more sophisticated, nervous systems followed, expanding in complexity. This feedback loop between sight and neural processing accelerated the evolution of brains, giving animals the capacity for more advanced behavior. In this sense, vision was not just about seeing but about thinking. There is also a geological dimension to this story. The clarity of shallow Cambrian seas enriched by oxygen and stirred by burrowing animals made them ideal environments for the evolution of eyes. Light could penetrate to the seafloor, offering a world of visual cues to exploit. In murkier waters, eyes would have been less useful, but in the Cambrian cradle, they became transformative. Once they appeared, they spread rapidly because the advantage of sight was overwhelming. When we consider the impact of vision, it becomes clear that it changed not only individual survival, but entire ecosystems. Predators became more efficient hunters, forcing prey to adapt with harder shells, faster movements, or deeper burrows. Prey that succeeded in avoiding detection survived and passed on their traits. This cycle of adaptation drove diversification, filling the seas with new forms and strategies. Vision was a spark that lit the fuse of the Cambrian Explosion, accelerating the pace of evolutionary change. It is worth reflecting on how different the world became once animals could look around. For the first time in Earth's history, the seas were filled with creatures that could observe one another, recognize shapes, and interact with their environment in visual ways. Communication, courtship, navigation, hunting, hiding, all gained new dimensions. The visual world was born, and with it came a cascade of possibilities that still shape life today. Our own eyes, complex organs that let us read words, see colors, and appreciate landscapes, trace their heritage to that moment. The genes and developmental pathways that build eyes are ancient, dating back to the Cambrian. We carry within us the legacy of that innovation, the result of tiny creatures discovering how to capture light. The world we know filled with vision-based interactions began in those shallow seas. What makes the story of eyes especially fascinating is how many forms they took. Some were simple, just patches of photoreceptive cells. Others became compounds with multiple lenses. Still others evolved into camera-like structures with a single lens focusing light onto a retina. Each solution came with strengths and trade-offs, and evolution preserved them all. That is why today we see insects with compound eyes, vertebrates with camera eyes, and countless variations in between. The Cambrian was the testing ground, and its experiments endured. As vision spread, the dynamics of the seafloor shifted further. Burrowers dug deeper to escape detection. Grazers fed more cautiously, scanning for movement before exposing themselves. Predators honed their pursuit, tracking the slightest flicker of motion. Even filter feeders, passive as they were, benefited from eyes by detecting favorable currents or recognizing safe spots to settle. The entire ecosystem reorganized around sight, each interaction shaped by what could be seen and what could be hidden. From the perspective of paleontology, the fossilized eyes of Cambrian animals are treasures. Trilobite eyes preserved in exquisite detail show the structure of calcite lenses. Fossilized Anomalocaris eyes with their thousands of facets reveal the sophistication of early vision. These fossils are not only evidence of anatomy, they are snapshots of perception, records of the moment when the world opened up to sight. To hold such a fossil is to glimpse the beginning of vision, a turning point in life's history. And yet, like so many Cambrian innovations, vision was not the end of a story, but the beginning. Once eyes appeared, they never vanished. Every ecosystem since has included animals that rely on sight. The coral reefs of today, filled with fish of brilliant colors, owe their existence in part to the Cambrian pioneers who first captured light. The birds above us, the mammals around us, even our own daily experience of the world through sight are all echoes of the ancient transformation. The Cambrian world was not only a place of new inventions like shells and eyes. It was also the stage where one of life's oldest and most important dramas began to play in earnest. The dance of predator and prey. The back-and-forth contest between those who hunt and those who struggle to avoid being hunted became one of the central forces shaping evolution. For the first time, the oceans were filled not just with passive creatures filtering water or drifting slowly, but with animals that pursued, ambushed, defended, and resisted. It was a cycle of survival that would ripple through every ecosystem from that time onward. Imagine standing in the shallow waters of a Cambrian sea, looking down through clear sunlight at the seafloor. A trilobite moves steadily across the sand, its many legs working in quiet rhythm, its compound eyes scanning the rippled surface. Suddenly, a shadow glides above. Anomalocaris, one of the great predators of its day, drifts by with graceful strokes of its body. Its large eyes are fixed downward, its frontal appendages poised to strike. The trilobite halts, hoping to avoid detection, but movement has already betrayed it. In a quick motion, the predator darts, seizing the smaller creature in its spine limbs. What follows is not the quiet grazing of earlier worlds, but a violent interaction. Predators and prey locked in a struggle for survival. Scenes like this defined the Cambrian seas. Before this time, predators have been rare and inefficient. Most life lives slowly, relying on passive feeding strategies. But with the arrival of vision, skeletons, and more efficient metabolisms powered by oxygen, predators could move swiftly, strike accurately, and process food effectively. Prey, in turn, were forced to adapt. Armor grew thicker, spines more numerous, and behaviors more evasive. The result was a feedback loop, an arms race where each new adaptation by hunters spurred new defenses by the hunted. This evolutionary contest produced much of the diversity we associate with a Cambrian explosion. When prey grew shells, predators developed stronger grasping limbs or crushing mouth parts. When predators became faster, prey dug deeper into sediments or swam away with more efficient movements. The back and forth never ended, and in that ongoing contest, new body plans, new strategies, and new species emerged. The fossil record captures evidence of this dance. Trilobite fossils often show healed scars, evidence of failed attacks where a predator struck. But the prey survived. Some shells are cracked or punctured, marks of encounters with attackers. The very abundance of defensive structures in Cambrian animals suggests the intensity of predation. Spines, scales, shells, and burrowing behaviors are not features one develops without strong pressure to survive. They are signs of a world where danger was ever present. Predators like Anomalocaris became symbols of this new age. Growing over a meter long with large eyes and grasping appendages, Anomalocaris was unlike anything that had come before. It patrolled the water column, swooping down on trilobites and other prey. But even Anomalocaris was part of the feedback loop. Some prey grew so well defended that they may have been difficult for it to consume. New predators eventually emerged with stronger mouth parts or different hunting strategies, taking its place. No predator could dominate forever in a world where prey were always adapting. Worms and bears also played roles in this dynamic. By digging into sediments, they created refuges from predators. But predators responded by learning to probe or dig into burrows themselves. This interaction reshaped the seafloor, turning it into a complex network of tunnels and hiding places. Every adaptation by prey to avoid detection or capture produced new opportunities for predators to specialize. The dance extended not only across the open water, but also into the sediments below. The rise of predation also had broader ecological consequences, with predators keeping populations of prey in check Ecosystems became more balanced and dynamic. Prey species that might otherwise have dominated were limited, allowing more diversity to coexist. Predation created pressure that prevented stagnation, pushing life into continual innovation. The Cambrian Explosion, therefore, was not just about more species appearing, but about new ecological roles forming and interacting in ways never seen before. It is worth considering how different the planet must have felt during this time. For billions of years, life had been largely passive. Now, for the first time, the oceans contained pursuit, ambush, defense, and evasion. Movement mattered more. Awareness mattered more. Behaviors became as important as body forms. The seafloor was no longer a quiet carpet of microbial mats, but a stage of constant motion where survival depended on awareness of others. The psychological dimension of life, awareness of being hunted or of hunting, had entered the story of evolution. Vision was central to this shift. Predators with eyes could detect prey before contact. Prey with eyes could see predators approaching. The relationship between hunter and hunted became more strategic, more responsive. Burrowing, hiding, or remaining still became effective strategies against visually oriented hunters. Quick movements or deceptive appearances became useful tools. Even color and pattern may have played roles, though the fossil record does not preserve such detail clearly. The invention of eyes and the pressure of predation were deeply intertwined, each amplifying the impact of the other. The dance of predator and prey was not confined to large animals. Even small creatures played their parts. Tiny shelled organisms were filtered from the water by predators, forcing them to develop thicker shells or cluster in protective groups. Micropredators may have stalked even smaller prey, pushing innovation at the microscopic scale. The arms race existed at every level of the food web, from the smallest filter feeder to the largest swimmer. When we think about evolution, it is tempting to imagine progress toward complexity as a simple climb upward. But the Cambrian Explosion shows that complexity often arises from conflict. The push and pull of predator and prey created a dynamic environment where innovation was necessary for survival. The diversity of body forms, from spiny armored worms to streamlined swimming hunters, was not the result of a plan, but of countless interactions in the struggle to eat and avoid being eaten. The legacy of this period extends to every ecosystem that followed. On land and in the seas, the balance of predator and prey has remained a driving force of evolution. The camouflage of a cuttlefish, the armor of an armadillo, the speed of a gazelle, the sharp teeth of a shark, all can trace their roots back to the Cambrian when the dance first began. The strategies may differ, the environments may change, but the rhythm is the same. Hunter and hunted, locked in a cycle of adaptation that never ends. In the Cambrian seas, this rhythm was new and raw. The predators were unlike anything the Earth had seen, and the prey were forced to invent new defenses quickly. The result was a world that seemed to burst with new forms. It was not only the birth of predation, but the birth of strategy, of interaction, of animals shaping one another's evolution in real time. The dance of predator and prey was one of the most powerful forces behind the Cambrian Explosion, and its influence continues in every ecosystem alive today. Among all the animals that flourished during the Cambrian, none are more instantly recognizable than the trilobites. Their fossils are scattered across the world in vast numbers, stamped into shale, limestone, and sandstone like tiny signatures left by a restless age. They became icons of the period not only because they were abundant, but because they embodied so many of the traits that defined the Cambrian Explosion. Hard exoskeletons, compound eyes, segmented bodies, diverse ecological roles. Trilobites carried the marks of innovation that turned the early Paleozoic oceans into a dynamic living stage. To speak of a life in the Cambrian is to picture trilobites moving steadily across the seafloor, leaving trails and molted shells as reminders of their presence. Trilobites belong to the aeropods, the same great lineage that would later produce crabs, lobsters, insects, and spiders. Like their descendants, they wore their skeletons on the outside. This gave them protection from predators and structure for their muscles, while also forcing them to mold as they grew. Each time a trilobite shed its exoskeleton, it left behind a fossil waiting to be preserved, which is one reason their remains are so common today. Their segmented bodies allowed flexibility, and many could roll into a ball when threatened. tucking their legs beneath the shield of their hardened backs. This combination of defense and mobility made them successful in a world where danger was never far away. What made trilobites especially remarkable was their variety. Over the course of their long history, they evolved into thousands of species, each adapted to its particular niche. In the Cambrian, they were already exploring different lifestyles. Some scuttled actively across the seafloor, scavenging and grazing. Others burrowed into sediments, leaving behind trackways and tunnels. A few may have swam through the water column, propelled by their many legs and guided by their compound eyes. The seafloor was alive with their movement, each trilobite playing its part in the expanding ecosystem. Their eyes were among the most advanced of their time. Built from calcite lenses, trilobite eyes were true compound eyes similar to those of modern insects. They gave a wide field of view, excellent for detecting motion. Some species had large, prominent eyes, suggesting active lifestyles in open water. Others had smaller eyes, perhaps relying more on touch and chemical cues in dim or buried environments. In some deep water species, eyes shrank or disappeared entirely, showing how trilobites adapted to every lighting condition from shallow sunlit seas to darker depths. These variations tell us not only about trilobites themselves, but about the environments they inhabited. Trilobites were not passive wanderers. Their fossilized trackways known as cruiana show that they move purposefully across the seafloor, sometimes in long lines that hint at group behavior. Some paleontologists suggest that trilobites may have migrated in mass gatherings, much like modern crabs or lobsters. Others propose that they followed one another while foraging, taking advantage of disturbed sediments. Whatever the case, their movements left patterns in ancient rocks that give us glimpses of life in motion, frozen in time. The exoskeleton of a trilobite was also a canvas for diversity. Some were smooth and streamlined, while others bristled with spines and ridges. These features may have served multiple purposes: defense against predators, sensory structures, or even displays for recognition among species. The variety of forms reflects the pressure of predation and the opportunities of ecological niches. Spiny trilobites were harder to swallow.
Streamlined ones could move more quickly, and ornamented shells may have given advantages we can only speculate about. Evolution in the Cambrian was experimenting with shape and function, and trilobites were at the center of that experimentation. The abundance of trilobites also made them keystone players in their ecosystems. As grazers, they stirred up sediments, feeding on detritus or tiny organisms. As prey, they supported predators like Anomalocaris. Their constant activity shaped the seafloor, recycling nutrients and altering habitats. In this sense, trilobites were not just inhabitants of the Cambrian world, they were engineers of it. Their presence influenced the distribution of other species, and their fossils record the density of life during this period. From a human perspective, trilobites hold a special place because of how common and well-preserved they are. Amateur fossil hunters and professional paleontologists alike find them in rocks across the globe. Their segmented forms are iconic, their eyes striking, their variations endless. They provide a direct connection to a time 500 million years ago when life was first exploring the possibilities of complex forms. Holding a trilobite fossil is holding a piece of that experiment, one of the most successful animals of its time. It is easy to imagine what the Cambrian seafloor looked like, with trilobites everywhere. Picture shallow waters, sunlight filtering down through clear waves, and on the sandy bottom, dozens of trilobites moving in different directions. Some graze quietly, others scurry at the approach of a predator. Others pause to moll and leave behind their cast-off shells. Their movements cross one another, etching lines into the sediment that might later fossilize. Above, predators pass by, scanning the bottom for motion. In the constant interplay of hunter and hunted, trilobites are the most visible actors on the stage. Their success did not end with the Cambrian. Trilobites continued to thrive for hundreds of millions of years, diversifying into countless forms. They survived multiple mass extinctions, adapted to changing environments, and only finally disappeared at the end of the Permian period, long after their Cambrian origins. But it was in those early seas that their story began, where they marched across the seafloor in numbers so great that they defined the fossil record of an era. The trilobites remind us that the Cambrian explosion was not just about strange and exotic creatures, but also about abundant, widespread ones that filled the oceans and shaped their ecosystems. They were the background against which the drama of predators and prey played out. The steady presence that left behind the clearest fossil record. Without them, our picture of the Cambrian would be far less complete. As life diversified, trilobites continued to adapt. Some evolved spines that made them nearly spherical when rolled up. Others developed long tails or elaborately ornamented heads. Some became giants for their kind, growing over 30 centimeters long, while others stayed small and delicate. This variety reflects not only their evolutionary success, but also the richness of Cambrian ecosystems, where many niches awaited exploration. The trilobites were versatile, resilient, and endlessly adaptable, qualities that made them one of the most enduring groups in Earth's history. Their role as both prey and participant in the arms race of the Cambrian cannot be overstated. Every predator that developed sharper appendages or better eyes was in part responding to trilobites. Every prey species that competed with them for food was shaped by their presence. The trilobites were central threads in the fabric of Cambrian life. Their march across the seafloor echoing through the fossil record as testimony to their importance. Even today, trilobites capture imagination not only for their abundance, but for their alien yet familiar appearance. Their segmented forms, compound eyes, and rolling defense strategies feel both ancient and recognizable, as if they bridge a gap between past and present. They remind us of how long life has been experimenting and how deeply our own world is built upon those early foundations. If trilobites were the visible marchers of the Cambrian seafloor, then worms and other burrowers were the hidden architects beneath it. They may not have had the armored grandeur of trilobites or the dramatic eyes of Anomalous, but their influence on the world was just as profound. By tunneling, stirring, and reshaping the sediments of the ocean floor, they transformed not only their own habitats, but also the entire ecological structure of the seas. The Cambrian was not just about new creatures appearing, it was about the way those creatures changed the Earth itself. And few did so as fundamentally as the worms and burrowers of the deep. Before their arrival, much of the ocean floor was coated with thick mats of microbes. These microbial carpets were stable, sticky layers that trapped sediments and created relatively flat and unbroken surfaces. Ed organisms lived upon them, pressing faint impressions into their surfaces and feeding passively. But once burrows became common, those mats were disrupted. Worms dug channels through them, loosened sediments and mixed oxygen deeper into the seafloor. What had been a still layered world became dynamic and porous. The very texture of the seafloor changed, and with it, the opportunities for life expanded. These activities are known as bioturbation, the biological reworking of sediments. Even small worms, by burrowing and feeding, altered the chemistry of the seafloor. Oxygen penetrated deeper, nutrients were recycled, and habitats became more complex. Instead of a flat microbial carpet, the seafloor became a landscape of tunnels, mounds, and disturbed sediments. Each burrow not only sheltered the worm that created it, but also provided microhabitats for bacteria and other organisms. The seafloor became busier, richer, and more interconnected because of these unseen builders. Fossil evidence of these changes comes in the form of trace fossils, unlike trilobites, which left behind their skeletons. Worms and burrowers often left only the tracks and tunnels they made. These trace fossils, known as fossils, reveal the presence of life even when bodies are absent. In Cambrian rocks, we find networks of burrows that crisscross the sediments, evidence of worms digging for food or shelter. Some traces are simple, straight tunnels, while others are elaborate spirals or branching patterns. Each one records an animal interacting with its environment, reshaping the seafloor with its movements. The diversity of these trace fossils tells us that many kinds of worms and burrowers were active during the Cambrian. Some were deposit feeders, swallowing sediments and extracting organic material. Others were predators, probing burrows for hidden prey. Still others built permanent tubes, reinforcing them with secreted material to create stable homes. These different strategies allowed worms to colonize almost every part of the seafloor, from shallow sands to deeper muds. Their constant activity ensured that no part of the seafloor remained untouched. This transformation had cascading effects on other animals. Burrowing created hiding places for small creatures trying to escape predators. Disturbed sediments exposed nutrients that supported grazers and scavengers. The mixing of oxygen into deeper layers allowed aerobic organisms to colonize places that had previously been anoxic. By changing the seafloor, worms and burrows expanded the range of habitable environments, opening niches that would never have existed without them. It is striking to consider how much of this change was driven by small, soft-bodied animals that rarely fossilized directly. They lack the armor of trilobites or the dramatic shapes of Anomalocaris, but they reshaped the foundation upon which other creatures lived. Their legacy is not in spectacular skeletons, but in the structure of the ecosystems they left behind. Every tunnel they dug, every sediment they stirred left ripples that influenced countless other species. Some of these burrows were simple worms, but others were more elaborate. Priapulid worms, for example, were common Cambrian predators. They had tubular bodies and grasping mouth parts, allowing them to seize prey hidden in sediments. Fossils from deposits like Chengjiang revealed their forms in surprising detail, showing that they were already well adapted to their roles. These predators made their living not by chasing prey in the open water, but by lurking in the seafloor, ambushing smaller animals. They added another layer to the predator-prey dynamic, one hidden beneath the surface. Tube builders added further complexity. Some early annelids and related animals secreted or glued together tubes that provided permanent shelters.
These tubes stabilized sediments and created hard surfaces where other organisms could attach. In this way, the activities of builders extended beyond their own survival, creating habitats that supported additional biodiversity. Early reefs may have incorporated the tubes of such builders, reinforcing the growing structural variety of Cambrian seas. The impact of borrowers also extended into the global environment. By disturbing microbial mats, they reduced the stability of sediments and increased the cycling of nutrients. By oxygenating the seafloor, they influenced the balance of carbon and sulfur in the oceans. These changes may even have fed back into the chemistry of the atmosphere. The hidden activity of worms and borrowers repeated across vast seafloors altered planetary systems in subtle but lasting ways. From the perspective of paleontology, these creatures remind us that not all important animals leave behind impressive fossils. Some leave only traces, subtle marks in the rock that hint at their presence. Yet, these marks are evidence of profound change. The abundance of trace fossils and Cambrian rocks shows that life was not only diversifying in form, but also in behavior. Animals were no longer just bodies preserved by chance. They were engineers leaving patterns of activity that shaped ecosystems. When we picture the Cambrian seafloor, it is easy to focus on trilobites and Anomalocaris, the charismatic creatures preserved in stunning fossils. But just beneath them, worms and bearers were at work, reshaping the ground they walked upon. The sediments were alive with activity, riddled with tunnels and traces. This invisible layer of life supported the visible one above it, and without it, the Cambrian explosion might have taken a very different path. Their influence continues today. Modern seafloors are still shaped by worms and borrowers. The same processes of bioturbation, oxygenation, and sediment mixing continue across the world's oceans. Every time a worm digs a burrow or a shrimp stirs up sand, it is echoing the activity of its Cambrian ancestors. The habits that began in those ancient seas became permanent features of life on Earth, shaping ecosystems for 500 million years and counting. In the end, worms and borrowers were builders, not in the sense of constructing grand structures, but in the sense of reshaping the foundation of ecosystems. They were the quiet engineers of the Cambrian, turning flat microbial mats into complex living. They remind us that some of the most important changes in the history of life were not dramatic innovations like eyes or shells, but the steady, patient work of countless small creatures altering their environment, one burrow at a time. When we think of reefs today, we picture coral gardens stretching in vivid colors, schools of fish weaving between branching structures, and sunlight filtering down to reveal a living city beneath the waves. But reefs did not begin this way. Their story reaches back into the Cambrian when the first reef-like communities began to form, not from corals as we know them, but from simpler organisms like sponges and archaeids. These early reefs lacked the towering complexity of modern coral systems. Yet, they were essential beginnings. They created the first three-dimensional habitats in the oceans, places where animals could find shelter, anchor themselves, and exploit new opportunities. The simplest of these builders were sponges. Even before the Cambrian, sponges had been filtering water through their porous bodies, extracting tiny particles of food. They had no nervous systems, no muscles, no eyes, yet they were efficient at what they did. During the Cambrian, sponges grew in variety and abundance, attaching themselves to hard surfaces on the seafloor. Some developed skeletons made of silica or calcium carbonate, structures that could persist after death and provide stability. In clusters, sponges formed mats and low mounds, raising surfaces above the sediment and adding texture to the seafloor. Another important group were the archaeids, an extinct lineage that resembled sponges, but had distinctive conical or cup-shaped skeletons. They flourished in Cambrian seas, especially in warm, shallow waters where sunlight encouraged productivity. Archaeothids often grew in clusters, their cups forming frameworks that other organisms could colonize. Together with sponges, they built the first reef systems in Earth's history. These structures were small compared to modern reefs, more like low ridges or patches than vast barriers. But they marked a turning point. For the first time, the seafloor offered elevated, stable habitats that changed the distribution of life. The importance of reefs lies not just in their builders, but in what they provide for others. A reef creates surfaces for attachment, crevices for hiding, and spaces where currents are altered, concentrating food. In Cambrian seas, these new habitats supported a variety of organisms. Small filter feeders could anchor themselves to the reef, gaining better access to flowing water. Tiny animals could hide in crevices, avoiding predators. Grazers moved across the surfaces, feeding on microbial films. Predators hunted among the structures, finding prey that would have been more exposed on open sediments. With reefs, ecosystems gained new layers of complexity. The presence of reefs also influenced sedimentation. As organisms secreted skeletons and built frameworks, they stabilized parts of the seafloor. Currents that might otherwise sweep sediments away were slowed, allowing fine particles to settle. Over time, this built thicker accumulations of carbonate material, contributing to the geological record. Cambrian reefs are preserved today as limestone formations, silent testimony to the work of tiny builders 500 million years ago. Erosion reefs in particular became widespread in certain regions, especially around what is now Siberia and parts of Australia. They formed reef belts hundreds of kilometers long, extending across shallow continental shelves. These reefs were among the most complex ecosystems of their time, hosting diverse communities of sponges, trilobites, brachiopods, and other early animals. Though archaeopterygids would eventually go extinct by the end of the Cambrian, during their time, they played a role similar to corals today. They were framework builders turning flat seafloors into structured landscapes. It is striking to consider how modest the beginnings of reefs were compared to what came later. In the Cambrian, reefs rose perhaps only a meter or two from the seafloor. Yet even the small elevation created dramatic effects. A trilobite moving across sediments might encounter a patch of sponges and archaea, suddenly finding a landscape of vertical structures, shadows, and hiding places. For small creatures, the difference between flat sand and a clustered reef was the difference between exposure and refuge. The presence of such habitats encouraged the evolution of new behaviors. From hiding to ambushing to specialized feeding, the chemistry of Cambrian oceans supported these builders. Warm shallow seas near the equator were saturated with calcium carbonate, the raw material for skeletons. As organisms experimented with biomineralization, reefs took shape as natural byproducts of skeleton building. The growth of reefs and the rise of skeletons reinforced one another, with each innovation making the seafloor more complex and hospitable to further life. The Cambrian seas were not uniform expanses. They were patchworks of environments, and reefs were among the richest of them. From a paleontological perspective, Cambrian reefs are invaluable. Fossil reefs preserve entire communities frozen in place. They show not only the reef builders, but also the animals that lived among them. In some formations, sponges and archaeids remain standing, surrounded by shells and trilobite fragments. These fossils give us snapshots of early ecosystems, capturing interactions and associations that are otherwise lost. To study a Cambrian reef fossil is to peer into a living neighborhood of the distant past. The decline of archaeids at the end of the Cambrian did not end reef building. Sponges continued, and later corals and other organisms would take their place. But the principle remained: reefs as structures created by life for life. Once the idea had been established, evolution never let it go. From the Cambrian to the present, reefs have been central hubs of biodiversity, shaping marine ecosystems across geological time. In imagining the Cambrian seas, we must picture these modest reefs rising from the seafloor, dotted with sponges and archaeid cups. Around them swim trilobites and small aeropods. Worms burrow nearby, their tunnels opening into reef crevices. Predators lurk in the shadows, while filter feeders extend themselves into currents flowing between structures. The reef is not vast, but it is vibrant, a pocket of life more complex than the sediment surrounding it. These scenes repeated across continental shelves, multiplying the possibilities for evolution. The story of Cambrian reefs also reminds us that ecosystems are not built only by dramatic innovations like eyes or shells. Sometimes they are built by accumulation, by small, passive creatures like sponges filtering water day after day. Their individual lives were simple, but together they created environments that transformed the course of evolution. The first reefs were quiet in their construction, yet loud in their impact. They were the beginnings of something that would shape oceans for the rest of Earth's history. And so as life marched across the Cambrian seafloor, it also began to build upward, stacking skeletons into structures that reached above the sediments. This vertical dimension added a new layer to ecosystems, expanding the possibilities of interaction. From these humble mounds and ridges, the great coral reefs of the future would grow. But the first steps were taken here in the Cambrian when sponges and archaeids turned the seafloor into something more than flat ground. One of the most striking things about the Cambrian seas was the sudden variety of forms that filled them. When we look at the fossil record before this period, life is dominated by relatively simple soft-bodied organisms. They had limited shapes, mostly flattened or fawn-like, living quietly on microbial mats or drifting in the water. But once the Cambrian explosion began, bodies started to take on new dimensions. There were spikes and plates, coils and spirals, appendages and armor. Evolution seemed to accelerate its experiments, producing a gallery of designs that had never been seen before. This explosion of shapes was not random decoration. Each feature represented a solution to the challenges of survival. Spines deterred predators. Shells provided protection. Spirals allowed shells to grow larger without becoming too heavy or unwieldy. Segments gave flexibility and specialization. The diversity of shapes reflected the diversity of strategies. Each organism is trying in its own way to navigate a world of predators, prey, and opportunity. Fossils from the Burgess Shale in Canada and the Changgang deposit in China reveal this variety in remarkable detail. Among them are animals like Hallucinia, with its long spines projecting upward from its body, making it difficult for predators to swallow. Uperbenia with 5 eyes and a strange clawed proboscis represents another kind of experiment. Its body plan is unlike anything alive today. Waiwaxia wore armor plates and rows of spines, turning its soft body into a fortress. These creatures look bizarre to us now, but in their time, they were simply exploring possibilities, testing what forms could succeed in the Cambrian world. The appearance of spiral shells is another fascinating development. Early mollusks like the helionids coiled their shells in tight spirals, a design that allowed them to grow larger while keeping their bodies protected. The spiral structure distributed weight efficiently, making it possible to expand without becoming too cumbersome. This design would prove so successful that it has persisted through time, appearing in snails, ammonites, and countless other groups. The first experiments in spiraling during the Cambrian set the stage for a lineage of coiled forms that still populate our world. Other animals explored plates and armor. The Hulkir, for example, were small creatures covered in hundreds of tiny armor plates with larger spines at either end. Their patchwork defenses made them difficult targets for predators, and their body plan hence it links to later groups like mollusks and annelids. The variety of plates, scales, and shells in Cambrian animals shows how strongly predation shaped evolution. Once predators appeared, defenses became a priority, and evolution responded with a dazzling range of protective shapes. Segmented bodies also became more elaborate. Arthropods like trilobites demonstrated how segmentation could provide flexibility and specialization. Different segments could evolve different functions: walking, feeding, sensing. This modular design allowed for endless variations, and aeropods would go on to become the most successful group of animals on Earth. But the roots of their success can be seen in the Cambrian, where segments were already being arranged in innovative ways. The diversity of shapes also extended to appendages. Some animals developed grasping claws, others paddle-like limbs for swimming, and still others delicate feeding appendages. Each shape represented a new way of interacting with the environment. For predators, claws and spines made hunting more efficient. For filter feeders, feathery appendages improved food capture. The Cambrian explosion was not just about adding armor, but about multiplying the possibilities of limbs and tools. What makes this explosion of form so remarkable is the speed with which it occurred, at least in geological terms. In a span of perhaps 20 to 30 million years, nearly every major body plan appeared. The shapes we see today, from worms to mollusks to aeropods, have roots in this period. The basic blueprints were laid down in the Cambrian, and evolution has been modifying them ever since. The spikes, spirals, plates, and segments of Cambrian animals represent the first drafts of body plans that would persist for hundreds of millions of years. It is important to remember that not all of these experiments were successful. Many Cambrian creatures left no descendants. Hallucinea with its spiny back and still-like legs is one example. Its lineage did not survive, yet its fossils capture the creativity of the period. Other body plans like those of trilobites proved enormously successful. The Cambrian explosion was not a steady climb, but a branching experiment with some paths ending quickly and others leading to enduring success. The environment of the Cambrian encouraged these experiments. Oxygen levels were higher than before, supporting more active metabolisms. The seafloor was more dynamic, with burrowers mixing sediments and creating new habitats. Reefs added structure to the environment, offering surfaces for attachment and shelter. Predators drove the evolution of defenses, while prey adaptations pushed predators to improve. In this dynamic world, every new shape had the potential to offer an advantage, and evolution seized the opportunity. From a modern perspective, the Cambrian animals often look strange, even alien. Their shapes challenge our expectations of what animals should look like. Yet, this strangeness is a reminder of how open evolution was at the time. Without established patterns, life explored widely. The spikes, spirals, and plates of Cambrian animals were part of a grand experiment in form. An experiment that produced both failures and enduring successes. Fossils give us direct evidence of these shapes, often preserved in exquisite detail. The Burgess shale, in particular, preserves even soft tissues, allowing us to see the fine spines of Hallucinea or the delicate limbs of Opabenia. These fossils show not only the variety of shapes, but also the textures and arrangements that made them functional. They're windows into the diversity of life at a time when animals were rapidly inventing themselves. This burst of shapes also had broader ecological effects. As animals diversified, ecosystems became more complex. Spiny animals alter predator behavior, armored animals influence hunting strategies, and burrowers change the sediment structure. Each new shape had ripple effects, influencing not just its own survival, but the survival of others. The Cambrian explosion was not just an increase in species, but an increase in interactions, each one shaped by the bodies of the creatures involved. The legacy of this period continues today. The shells of mollusks, the segmented bodies of aeropods, the coiled forms of snails, the armor plates of some fish, all trace back to the experiments of the Cambrian. Our world is filled with the descendants of those shapes, reminders of the time when life first explored the possibilities of form. Even the shapes that did not last remain important, for they show us how wide the field of possibilities once was. The Cambrian explosion of shapes was not about perfection, but about exploration. Evolution tried spikes, spirals, plates, and segments, testing what worked in a changing world. Some designs thrived, others vanished, but together they created a landscape of diversity that set the stage for the rest of animal life. To walk through a Cambrian seafloor would have been to see a gallery of the living experiments. Each body plans a different answer to the same questions of survival. When paleontologists first uncovered the fossils of Hallucinea, they were so strange that even seasoned scientists struggled to make sense of them. At first glance, the animals seemed to defy logic. Its long, thin body was lined with tall spines, while pairs of slender stilt-like legs stretched down from the underside. At one end was a bulbous structure that could have been a head or perhaps a tail, depending on how you looked at it. For years, reconstructions of Hallucinea flipped back and forth, sometimes shown walking on its spines, sometimes on its legs, with its head placed at either end. The confusion was not simply a matter of poor preservation. It was a reflection of just how unusual this little Cambrian creature really was. Hallucinea has since become one of the icons of the Cambrian explosion, a a symbol of the experimental nature of evolution during the time. Its fossils found in deposits like the Burgess Shale in Canada and the Qinghang in China reveal a creature only a few cm long yet striking in design. Modern studies suggest that it was related to the velvet worms or small worm-like animals that still exist today in tropical forests. But even with this connection, Halucinia's specific form remains unique. Its thin body carried pairs of claw-tipped legs while rows of spines projected upward, forming a formidable defense. Its tiny head bore a simple mouth and possibly eyes, features that once seemed impossible to interpret. The story of Halucinia highlights the strangeness of Cambrian life. Evolution during this period was trying out body plans that sometimes look alien to us, because they do not fit neatly into modern categories. In Halucinia, we see an early experiment in combining soft-bodied flexibility with rigid defense. The spines discouraged predators, while the legs allowed movement across the seafloor. The claws at the tips of the legs suggest it could grip surfaces, perhaps anchoring itself or crawling over uneven ground. Though it was small, its bizarre appearance would have made it a difficult target, and in the Cambrian seas, that was an advantage. Halucinia is not the only strange creature from this period. The Burgess Shale and Qinghang deposits are filled with animals that seem to defy classification. Opabenia, for instance, was another small creature notable for its 5 eyes perched at top of its head and its long, flexible proboscis ending in a claw. With this appendage, it could reach forward to seize food and bring it to its mouth, all while keeping watch in nearly every direction. To modern eyes, Opabenia looks almost comical, like a creature from a surreal illustration. Yet in its time, it was a functional design, perfectly suited to a scavenging lifestyle and complex environments. Another curious Cambrian resident was Weaxia, a small oval-bodied animal covered with overlapping scales and 2 rows of long spines. Its body resembled a tiny armored mat with defenses that would have discouraged many predators. Some researchers think Weaxia was related to mollusks while others see connections to annelid worms. Its scraping mouthparts suggest it grazed on microbial mats or algae, living a quiet existence while protected by its formidable covering. Weaxia shows how even small animals invested heavily in armor. During the predator-prey arms race of the Cambrian, there were also the Hulkurids, worm-like creatures covered in small armor plates and larger protective spines. Their fossils are found in fragments scattered across ancient sediments, and when reconstructed, they reveal elongated bodies armored from end to end. Hulkurids may have crawled across the seafloor, their flexible bodies shielded by their mosaic of plates. Like Weaxia, they show how armor was a repeated solution to the dangers of the Cambrian. Even small grazers armed themselves, turning their soft bodies into walking fortresses. The Cambrian seas were full of creatures that today seem almost whimsical in their variety. Some had bizarre appendages, others unusual proportions, and still others strange combinations of features that make them hard to classify. The great predator anomalous, for example, look less strange to us only because we can see parallels to modern aeropods. But in its time, it was entirely new with large compound eyes and grasping limbs unlike anything before. Even the trilobites, which appear more familiar to us, represented a bold new use of segmentation and exoskeletons. Part of what makes these creatures seem strange to us is that they were early experiments in body design. Evolution had not yet settled into the patterns we recognize today. Instead, it was testing possibilities. Some of those possibilities survived and flourished, becoming the basis for modern groups. Others faded away, leaving only fossils as reminders of paths not taken. Halucinia, Opabenia, and Weaxia represent these side branches, experiments that worked in their own time, but did not persist beyond it. The preservation of these animals in deposits like the Burgess Shale is what allows us to appreciate their strangeness. Normally, soft-bodied animals decay too quickly to fossilize, but under exceptional conditions, fine sediments bury these creatures rapidly, preserving even delicate features. As a result, we can see the tiny claws of Erlucagenia, the 5 eyes of Opabenia, and the armor scales of Weaxia. These details give us an intimate view of a world that would otherwise be lost. Without them, we might imagine the Cambrian is dominated only by hardshill trilobites and predators, missing the rich diversity of odd forms that actually existed. Studying these creatures also teaches us humility about evolution. It is tempting to see the history of life as a steady progression toward the forms we know today. But the Cambrian reminds us that many other possibilities once existed. Hallucinia's spiny body, Upper Benia's 5 eyes, Waxia's armored back. These were all viable solutions to survival, even if they seem unusual to us. Evolution does not work toward a predetermined goal. It explores possibilities, and sometimes those possibilities seem almost fantastical. For paleontologists, reconstructing these animals has been a challenge and a delight. Each new fossil adds details that change our understanding. Early reconstructions of Hallucinia placed it upside down, walking on its spines. Later studies corrected this, showing that the spines pointed upward and the clawed legs downward. Even now, debates continue about its exact relationships. Similarly, Opabenia has been the subject of extensive study, with researchers analyzing its unusual proboscis and eye arrangement. Each discovery forces scientists to rethink the boundaries of what animals can be. For us, looking back, these creatures capture the imagination. They show that the history of life is filled with strangeness and that our familiar world is only one version of what could have been. To imagine the Cambrian seas is to imagine walking through a gallery of living oddities, each one a reminder that life is both inventive and unpredictable. Yet for all their strangeness, these animals were ordinary in their time. Hallucinia crawled along the seafloor. Upper Benia probed the sediments where Waxier grazed quietly, and trilobites skewered nearby. To them, nothing was bizarre. It was simply life. The fact that we see them as unusual is a reflection of our perspective, not theirs. What mattered then was survival, and each of these animals found a way to make it work. As we study them today, we are reminded that the Cambrian explosion was not only about the origins of familiar groups, but also about the richness of possibilities. Hallucinia and its companions are symbols of that richness, creatures that show us the creativity of evolution in a time when the rules of body design were still being written. They may not have left descendants, but they left us with a clearer picture of just how diverse life can be. Among the many strange creatures that swam through Cambrian seas, Opabenia stands out as one of the most unusual. When its fossils were first studied in detail, the paleontologist presenting it at a conference reportedly drew laughter from the audience, not because the reconstruction was flawed, but because it looked so bizarre. 5 eyes sat perched on its head, arranged to give an almost panoramic view. Extending forward from its face was a long, flexible proboscis ending in a claw-like structure, as if the animal carried a grasping arm where its nose should be. With its soft, segmented body and swimming flaps along its sides, Upper Benia seemed like an animal stitched together from unrelated parts, a design so strange that it defied easy categorization. Yet for all its oddity, it was real, and in its time, it was perfectly suited to life in the Cambrian seas. Opabenia was small, about 7 centimeters long, though some specimens grew slightly larger. Its body was segmented with lobes or flaps along the sides that helped it swim, perhaps undulating gently as it moved through the water. At the rear was a fan-like tail that may have provided bursts of propulsion. Its head was tiny compared to its body, but the eyes and proboscis gave it a distinctive appearance. The 5 eyes were raised on short stalks arranged in a semicircle that gave the animal a wide field of vision. In a world where predators lurked in every direction, the ability to see broadly would have been a major advantage. The proboscis is what makes Opabenia especially memorable. Flexible and extendable, it could reach forward to probe sediments, grasp small prey, or pull food toward the mouth. At the tip, a claw-like appendage acted like a grabbing tool, able to pinch and hold. The mouth itself faced backward, tucked beneath the head, so food had to be passed along by the proboscis before being ingested. At first glance, this arrangement seems awkward, but in practice, it was an effective feeding strategy. Instead of exposing its whole body while hunting, Opabenia could stay partially hidden and extend its proboscis into crevices, scooping up worms, larvae, or bits of organic debris. The Burgess Shale in Canada preserves Opabenia fossils in remarkable detail, including impressions of soft tissues that usually decay. From these fossils, scientists can reconstruct not only the outline of the animal, but also details of its internal organs. Studies suggest that Opabenia may have had gills along its body flaps, allowing it to extract oxygen from the water as it swam. This arrangement, combined with its streamlined body, indicates it was an active animal, capable of moving steadily through its environment. It was not a swift predator like a Nomalocaris, but it was mobile enough to search for food across the seafloor. For decades, Opabinia puzzled paleontologists trying to determine its place in the tree of life. It did not fit neatly with any known group. Its segmented body suggested some connection to arthropods, but it lacked the hard exoskeleton that defined trilobites and other early aeropods. Its proboscis was unlike anything in modern aeropods, and its 5 eyes had no clear counterpart. Over time, comparisons to other Cambrian fossils as well as to modern aeropods led to the idea that Opabinia was part of a stem group related to aeropods. In other words, it was not a direct ancestor of any living animal, but it belonged to the broader lineage that would eventually give rise to insects, crustaceans, and spiders. In this sense, Opabinia represents an evolutionary experiment, one of many body plans tested during the Cambrian Explosion. It combined features in unusual ways, and though its lineage did not survive, it illustrates the diversity of possibilities being explored. The 5 eyes may have been an early attempt at enhancing vision, and the proboscis a novel feeding adaptation. Other Cambrian animals also show unusual sensory and feeding structures, suggesting that this was a time of great experimentation with how animals interacted with their environments. Opperbinia's odd design also helps us appreciate how evolution does not work toward a predetermined goal. To us, the proboscis seems strange, but to Opperbinia, it was simply a functional tool. The fact that no modern animals have such a structure does not mean it was ineffective, only that other designs proved more enduring over time. In the Cambrian seas, Opabinia thrived in its own niche, hunting small prey and scavenging, surviving among trilobites, worms, and sponges. Its odd appearance is a reminder that what seems strange to us was normal for its own moment in history. The study of Opabinia also underscores the importance of exceptional fossil sites, like the Burgess Shale. Without such preservation, soft-bodied animals like this would leave no trace and we would never know they existed. Our picture of the Cambrian would be limited to hard-shelled creatures, and the explosion of forms would seem less dramatic. With the Burgess Shale, we see not just the armored trilobites, but also the delicate flaps of Opabinia, the spines of Halicogenia, and the scales of Weaxia. Together, these fossils reveal a far richer and stranger world than we might otherwise imagine. For paleontologists, Opabinia is more than just an oddity. It is a key piece of the puzzle in understanding early arthropod evolution. By comparing its features to those of other Cambrian animals, researchers can trace how body plans changed over time. The arrangement of its head, proboscis, and eyes sheds light on how early aeropods may have experimented with feeding and sensory structures before settling into the more familiar arrangements we see today. Each new fossil adds detail, refining our understanding of how creatures like Opabinia fit into the larger story. From a broader perspective, Opabinia is a reminder of the creativity of evolution. Its 5 eyes and snout-like proboscis are unusual to us, but they demonstrate how many different ways life can solve the challenges of survival. The Cambrian was a time when the rules were not yet established, and Opperbinia's body was one of countless variations tested by natural selection. Its success was temporary, but its existence enriches our picture of what life can be. When we imagine the Cambrian seas, we can picture it gliding gently above the seafloor, its flaps undulating, its proboscis reaching into burrows or grasping at small prey. Its 5 eyes swivel to monitor its surroundings, while trilobites scuttle nearby and worms burrow beneath the sediment. Above, predators like Unomalacaris search for movement, but Opabinia keeps close to the bottom, probing carefully. To us, it looks strange, but to the Cambrian seas, it was simply one more creature among many, part of a community filled with diversity and surprise. Opabinia's fossils capture not only the details of its anatomy, but also the sense of wonder that comes from studying deep time. Holding such a fossil, we see directly into a world 500 million years old, a world where life was just beginning to explore the possibilities of complexity. In its 5 eyes and its flexible snout, we see not only strangeness, but also the evidence of life's restless creativity. Opabinia may be gone, but in the record it left behind, it continues to remind us of the extraordinary breadth of the Cambrian Explosion. In the Cambrian seas, most animals were small, soft-bodied, and vulnerable. Trilobites scuttled across the seafloor. Worms burrowed through sediments, and sponges filtered water quietly. But above them swam something larger, faster, and far more intimidating. Anomalocaris, whose name means unusual shrimp, was one of the earliest apex predators, and in its time, it dominated the oceans. Stretching up to a meter in length, it was massive compared to most of its contemporaries. Its large compound eyes, grasping appendages, and circular mouth made it a hunter unlike anything the world had seen before. The first fossils of Anomalocaris were discovered in fragments, and for years, scientists misunderstood what they were looking at. The grasping appendages were thought to be shrimp-like animals on their own, while the mouth was mistaken for a jellyfish. Only later did paleontologists realize that these pieces all belonged to the same animal, one that was far stranger and far more impressive than the parts suggested individually. When the complete reconstruction finally emerged, it revealed a creature that was agile, well-armed, and perfectly adapted to the Cambrian arms race. Anomalous had long segmented body lined with flaps that allowed it to swim by undulating through the water. At the end of its body was a fan-like tail, which it could use for bursts of speed or for steering. This combination of flaps and tail made it a powerful swimmer capable of chasing down prey or maneuvering through complex environments. Its size alone would have made it formidable, but its head carried the most striking features. On the front of its head were two large jointed appendages. These were flexible and tipped with rows of spines designed for seizing and holding prey. Anomalocaris could sweep these appendages forward, grasp a trilobite or other animal, and bring it toward its mouth. The mouth was circular, ringed with hardened plates that could open and close like the iris of a camera lens. At one time, scientists believed Anomalocaris used this mouth to crush trilobite shells, though later studies suggest it may not have been able to break the hardest exoskeletons. Instead, it likely focused on softer prey or used its appendages to flip trilobites over, exposing their more vulnerable undersides. Above these feeding structures were its eyes. Fossil evidence shows that Anomalocaris had compound eyes, each with thousands of lenses, similar in some ways to the eyes of modern insects and crustaceans. This made it one of the earliest animals with sophisticated vision. Its eyes were large relative to its body, giving it an acute ability to detect movement and track prey. In a world where many animals still relied on simple eyes or light-sensitive patches, Anomalocaris saw with clarity and precision, giving it a major advantage as a hunter. This combination of speed, vision, and grasping appendages made Anomalocaris a predator unlike anything before. It could swim actively, pursue prey, and seize it with accuracy. The Cambrian Explosion had produced many new body forms, and Anomalocaris stood at the top of this expanding food web, a hunter that forced other animals to evolve defenses. The shells, spines, and burrows of Cambrian creatures can be seen as responses to the pressure exerted by predators. Like Anomalocaris, in imagining the Cambrian seas, one can picture trilobites crawling across the sediment, worms poking out of burrows and sponges filtering quietly. Suddenly, a shadow passes above. Anomalocaris glides overhead, its flaps rippling in coordinated waves. Its eyes skim the seafloor, its appendages held forward, ready to snatch. Spotting a trilobite, it swoops downward, sweeps the prey into its grasp, and carries it upward to its circular mouth. Whether the trilobite escapes or falls victim depends on timing and luck, but the encounter itself would have been dramatic. Despite its reputation, Anomalocaris was not invincible. Its body, though large, lacked the heavy armor of trilobites. It relied on speed and agility rather than defense. If injured or trapped, it would have been vulnerable. Its mouth, once thought to be capable of crushing shells, may have been limited to softer prey. Even apex predators have constraints, and Anomalocaris lived within the ecological balance of its time. Still, in the Cambrian seas, few creatures could challenge it, and it remains one of the best examples of how quickly predators evolved during this period. The discovery of Anomalocaris also reveals much about how science works. For decades, its parts were studied in isolation. Only when paleontologists looked more carefully and considered the possibility of a single integrated animal did its true nature come to light. Today, complete fossils show Anomalocaris in full, preserving even the fine details of its flaps and appendages. This transformation from misunderstood fragments to an iconic predator is one of the great detective stories of paleontology. From an evolutionary perspective, Anomalocaris and its relatives belong to a group known as the radiodons. These were early arthropod-like animals related to the lineage. that would eventually give rise to modern aeropods. Radiodons came in many forms, some adapted for predation, others for filter feeding. Anomaly was the most famous and formidable among them, but it was part of a broader radiation of animals experimenting with new ways of feeding and moving. The radiodons highlight how versatile early arthropod designs could be, and how quickly they diversified during the Cambrian. The legacy of Anomalocaris lies in its role as an early apex predator. By preying on other animals, it drove evolutionary change. The development of shells, spines, and burrowing behaviors can be seen as part of the arms race it helped ignite. Its sophisticated eyes point to the importance of vision and predator-prey interactions, an innovation that would shape evolution for the rest of Earth's history. Anomalocaris was not just another Cambrian oddity. It was a turning point in the development of complex ecosystems for us. Today, looking at anomalous fossils is a chance to imagine a world where the balance of power was shifting. Before the Cambrian, most life had been passive, feeding on microbes or filtering particles. With the rise of predators like Anomalous, active hunting became central. The oceans became arenas of pursuit, escape, and defense. Life was no longer just about existing. It was about outmaneuvering, outseeing, and outsurviving. Anomalous reminds us that the Cambrian explosion was not simply a proliferation of new body shapes, but also a transformation in ecological roles. Predators and prey created pressures that fueled further innovation. The claws, shells, burrows, and spines of countless Cambrian animals tell the story of a world responding to hunters at the top. In that story, Anomalocaris was one of the leading players, a creature that redefined what it meant to be an animal in the sea. When we picture it gliding through ancient waters, its flaps undulating in rhythm, its eyes glinting, and its appendages poised, we see not only a predator, but a symbol of the new energy of the Cambrian explosion. Life had moved beyond simple forms and into complexity, competition, and creativity. And at the center of the drama swam Anomalous, the ocean's first great hunter, shaping the world around it in ways still felt today. As the Cambrian seas unfolded into a world of new shapes and behaviors, life did not remain confined to simple habits or shallow grounds. For millions of years, most animals lived near the seafloor, close to microbial mats, reefs, and soft sediments. These areas provided food, oxygen, and stability. But as ecosystems grew more complex, creatures began exploring new spaces and experimenting with new ways of living. Some swam higher into the water column, others burrowed deeper into sediments, and still others developed bodies and behaviors that allowed them to exploit opportunities their ancestors never touched. This movement beyond the simple shallows marked an important step in the story of complexity. The seafloor itself was already transforming. In the Precambrian world, microbial mats dominated the sediments, creating relatively uniform environments. With the Cambrian explosion, burrowing animals disrupted these mats, mixing sediments, creating oxygenic layers, and opening pathways for new life. Worms, trilobites, and other burrowers were not just living in sediments, but engineering them, reshaping the seafloor into a dynamic habitat. This change allowed more animals to occupy different depths within the same patch of sediment. Some grazed near the surface, others tunneled below, and predators learned to follow them. The simple flat seabed became a layered ecosystem with life stacked vertically, as well as spread horizontally. At the same time, many creatures ventured into open water. For early animals, drifting or swimming away from the seafloor was risky. Without places to hide, they were exposed to predators. Yet, this open space also offered opportunities. Food particles suspended in the water, plankton drifting in currents, and freedom from competition on crowded sediments. Some aeropods developed flaps or appendages for active swimming. Others adopted more streamlined bodies, allowing them to glide through open waters. This expansion upward added a new dimension to ecosystems. Instead of being limited to the bottom, life now filled the water column itself. The rise of predators like Anomalous made this expansion both dangerous and necessary. On the seafloor, trilobites and other animals could be seized by a hunter sweeping overhead. Burrowing deeper or swimming higher provided escape routes. Complexity was born not only from opportunity, but also from pressure. Every innovation by predators encouraged new counter-innovations by prey. As animals diversified in shape and behavior, ecosystems became more intricate. Another step toward complexity came from the increasing variety of body plans. Worms developed specialized feeding structures from proboscises for probing to jaws for grasping. Aeropods experimented with claws, antennae, and segmented limbs. Each adaptation opens new ecological roles. Mollusks evolved shells in coiled or conical forms, offering both protection and structural stability. With each new design, animals could exploit a slightly different part of the environment. And as these roles multiplied, ecosystems work into networks of interaction. Complexity is not simply about individual organisms. It is about the interconnections between them. Reefs also contributed to this expansion. Built by sponges and archaeoids, Cambrian reefs created structured habitats where animals could anchor, hide, or graze. In these spaces, small filter feeders flourished. Predators hunted among crevices, and grazers scraped microbial films. A reef was more than a collection of organisms. It was a three-dimensional framework that supported diversity. By offering new surfaces and shelters, reefs encourage animals to adopt more specialized lifestyles. The first reef ecosystems were modest in size, but their impact on complexity was enormous. Vision played its part as well. With the emergence of compound eyes in animals like trilobites and anomalous, interactions grew sharper. Predators could spot prey at greater distances, and prey needed better defenses or behaviors to survive. Camouflage, burrowing, and spines became more important. The escalation of vision and defense turned the Cambrian seas into a place of constant testing. Each adaptation sparked new countermeasures, and each countermeasure opened new evolutionary paths. Complexity grew from the cycle of challenge and response. Even small animals contributed to this broader pattern. Consider the tiny early chordates like Pichia with its notochord running the length of its body. Though only a few cm long, it represented a step toward greater structural complexity. The notochord provided support for muscles, enabling more controlled swimming. This design would eventually give rise to vertebrates. But in the Cambrian, it was just another variation among many. Its presence, however, shows how new internal structures were adding depth to what animals could do. The Cambrian seas also saw diversity in feeding strategies. Filter feeders strained particles from water. Grazers scraped microbial films. Deposit feeders consumed sediments. Predators chased or ambushed prey, and scavengers cleaned up the remains. Each feeding style influenced the others, creating webs of interaction. A predator reduced the numbers of grazers, allowing microbial mats to recover. Scavengers thrived after predators finished feeding. Filter feeders competed for current exposed surfaces. Complexity is woven from such relationships, and during the Cambrian, these relationships multiplied. From a geological perspective, the Cambrian explosion marks the first time ecosystems began to resemble modern ones. Before, life was relatively flat and uniform. After, it became intricate with multiple layers of habitats, roles, and interactions. The first steps into complexity were not dramatic leaps, but accumulations of many small innovations. A claw here, a burrow there, a reef rising, an eye evolving. Each piece added to the whole, and together they transformed the oceans into dynamic, interconnected systems. It is important to remember that this complexity did not arise evenly everywhere. Some regions, like the shallow seas around what is now Canada or China, preserve rich fossil assemblages that reveal the full tapestry of Cambrian life. Other areas may have remained simpler, with microbial mats and a few grazing animals dominating. Complexity spread in patches, growing strongest where conditions allowed diversity to flourish. Over time, these patches expanded and ecosystems everywhere became more intricate. The Cambrian explosion then was not just a burst of new species. It was a reorganization of how life interacted. The first predators pushed prey into new strategies. The first borrowers reshaped sediments. The first reef builders created layered habitats. The first advanced eyes changed how animals perceived their world. Each of these steps extended life beyond the simple shallows and into realms of complexity that would continue to grow through the rest of Earth's history. When we imagine those seas, we should not see them as empty plains with scattered trilobites. Instead, we should picture sediments riddled with burrows, reefs dotted with sponges and small grazers, predators gliding above, and schools of small animals drifting in the water column. Complexity filled every corner, from the mud beneath to the surface currents above. The Cambrian seas were not just alive. They were alive in layers, alive in interactions, alive in ways that had never existed before. The importance of this moment cannot be overstated. Once complexity had taken hold, it never retreated. Life continued to build upon it, adding new forms, new behaviors, and new interactions. The simple world of microbial mats and passive feeders was gone, replaced by a living web of competition, cooperation, and creativity. In the Cambrian, life stepped into complexity, and in doing so, it set the course for everything that followed. The Cambrian world was not only alive with new creatures, but also restless beneath the surface. The continents themselves were shifting, breaking apart, and colliding, while the seas that covered them rose and fell with changing climates and tectonic movements. To understand the story of the Cambrian explosion, it is not enough to look only at the animals. We also have to look at the stage they lived on. The land masses, the shallow seas, the currents, and the climate all shaped the opportunities available to life. Without these shifting foundations, the story of diversity would have played out very differently. 500 million years ago, the continents did not resemble the familiar shapes we know today. Instead, they were smaller, scattered pieces clustered mostly in the southern hemisphere. Laurentia, which would later form the core of North America, sat near the equator. Gondwana, an enormous land mass that included what are now South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, and parts of Asia stretched across the south. Siberia and Baltica were separate continents drifting in other regions. These shifting plates created coastlines and shallow seas, environments that turned out to be ideal for the rise of complex marine life. Shallow seas were especially important. Much of the Cambrian world was covered not by deep ocean, but by wide continental shelves flooded by warm sunlit waters. These shelves were nurseries of biodiversity. Sunlight reached the seafloor, fueling photosynthesis and microbial mats and algae, which in turn supported grazing animals. Currents carried nutrients across these shelves, creating fertile zones where sponges, worms, trilobites, and countless other creatures thrived. Compared to the dark depths of the open ocean, the continental shelves were teeming with possibilities. The position of the continents also influenced ocean circulation. With Laurentia near the equator, warm currents spread across its shallow seas, supporting reef-building organisms and diverse communities. Gondwana's vast size created long coastlines, each with different environments depending on latitude and local conditions. The movement of tectonic plates continually reshaped these coastlines, creating new habitats while closing off others. For the animals living there, these shifts meant constant opportunities as well as constant disruptions. Ecosystems could flourish in one region only to be altered as seas advanced or retreated. Climate during the Cambrian was generally warm with high levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. There were no polar ice caps, and sea levels were high. This warmth contributed to the expansion of shallow seas which spread across much of the land. Seasonal variation may have existed, but without large continents near the poles, extreme cold was rare. For marine life, these conditions were favorable. Warm, stable oceans with abundant shallow habitats allowed organisms to spread widely and adapt to local variations. Tectonic activity also created mountain ranges and volcanic regions that influenced the chemistry of the oceans. Weathering of newly uplifted rocks released nutrients like calcium and phosphorus, which washed into the seas. These nutrients fueled primary productivity, which in turn supported the growing food web. The availability of calcium in particular may have encouraged the evolution of shells and skeletons as animals incorporated it into their bodies for protection and support. Thus, the movement of continents and the erosion of rocks had direct consequences for the creatures of the Cambrian seas. The record of these changes is written in sediments and rocks. Shale, limestone, and sandstone deposits from Cambrian times preserve not only fossils, but also clues about ancient environments. Ripple marks show where shallow waters once moved across sandy floors. Carbonate layers reveal warm, clear seas where reefs grew. Mudstone, like those of the Burgess Shale, captured the fine details of animals that lived in deeper, quieter waters just offshore. Each type of rock tells part of the story of how continents and seas interacted. As continents shifted, barriers and corridors for marine life appeared. Shallow seaways connected regions, allowing species to disperse and mix. At other times, rising land or falling seas isolated populations encouraging them to evolve separately. This constant rearrangement created a dynamic backdrop for evolution. Some lineages spread across vast areas, while others became restricted to particular basins. The diversity we see in Cambrian fossils reflects not only evolutionary innovation, but also the geography of the time. For example, trilobites, one of the most successful Cambrian groups, show patterns of distribution that reflect continental positions. Different trilobite families are found in Laurentia compared to Gondwana, indicating that ocean barriers limited their spread. Yet, in some intervals, similar species appear on multiple continents, showing that connections between seas allowed migration. These patterns help paleontologists reconstruct not only evolutionary history, but also the movements of ancient plates. It is easy to think of evolution as driven entirely by biological interactions, predators chasing prey, spines evolving in response to claws. But geology played an equal role. The shifting continents set the stage, determining where shallow seas existed, where nutrients were available, and where populations could mix. The Cambrian Explosion was not just a biological event, but also a geological one, born from the restless movement of Earth's crust. To imagine this world, picture broad, warm seas spreading over continental shelves, dotted with reefs and alive with trilobites, sponges, and worms. Picture chains of islands formed by volcanic activity, their erosion feeding minerals into the water. Picture coastlines constantly changing as plates drift and seas rise. Life was not separate from the shifting stage. It was woven into it, adapting to every change. Even the great predators like Anomalocaris owed part of their success to these conditions. Without wide shallow seas full of prey, such predators could not have thrived. Without stable climates and high sea levels, ecosystems would not have been so rich. The movements of continents and the chemistry of oceans set the foundation upon which evolutionary experiments played out. The Cambrian period reminds us that the Earth itself is alive with motion. Plates drift, collide, and reshape the surface. Seas flood and retreat. Mountains rise and crumble. Life is carried along with these shifts, sometimes flourishing, sometimes struggling, always adapting. Complexity in the oceans was not only the result of animals competing, but also of continents moving beneath them. The dance of tectonics and biology was inseparable, and together they created the living seas we now study through fossils. High in the Canadian Rockies, in a place where today hikers climb past sharp cliffs and alpine meadows, there is a layer of stone that holds some of the most extraordinary secrets in the history of life. This place is the Burgess Shale, and within its dark, fine-grained rocks lie fossils so detailed that even the outlines of eyes, flaps, and tiny limbs are preserved. To paleontologists, this site is like a diary written by the Cambrian seas themselves, a record not only of animals with hard shells, but also of those soft-bodied forms that almost never survive in the fossil record. Without the Burgess Shale, our picture of the Cambrian would be narrower, filled mostly with trilobites and shelled mollusks. With it we see Alucina, Opibenia, Anomalous, Waxia, and countless others in exquisite detail. The Burgess Shale was first discovered in the early 20th century by Charles Walcott, a geologist working for the Smithsonian Institution. In 1909, while riding his horse along a trail in the Canadian Rockies, he noticed strange fossils weathering out of a slab of shale. Intrigued, he returned to the spot with his family and began collecting. What he uncovered over the next several years was a treasure trove of Cambrian life. Walcott gathered thousands of specimens, carefully splitting the shale layers to reveal creatures pressed flat, but still remarkably detailed. At the time, the significance of the discovery was not fully recognized. Many of the fossils were described as unusual versions of known groups, and the true diversity of the Burgess Shale would not be appreciated until decades later. What makes the Burgess Shale so special is the way it preserves soft tissues. Normally soft-bodied animals decay rapidly after death, leaving little or no trace. In the Burgess Shale, however, fine mud and a lack of oxygen work together to seal organisms quickly and prevent decomposition. Over time, the carbon from their bodies left dark impressions in the rock, sometimes showing even the smallest details. Gills, stomachs, and delicate limbs appear in fossils from this site, giving us a direct window into the anatomy of creatures that would otherwise be invisible. The conditions that created this preservation were unusual. The Burgess Shale formed at the base of an underwater cliff where mud flows occasionally buried animals living on the seafloor below. These sudden deposits trapped organisms and sealed them off from scavengers and oxygen, creating perfect circumstances for fossilization. This combination of rapid burial and fine-grained sediments is rare in the fossil record, which is why sites like the Burgess Shale are so precious. From these rocks, paleontologists have reconstructed entire communities. Trilobites skewered across the mud while sponges and algae anchored to the seabed. Hallucinia with its spines and clawed legs crawled nearby while Opabenia swept its flexible proboscis through the sediments. Weaxia grazed quietly, its spines bristling, and predators like Anomalocaris glided above, scanning with compound eyes. Together, these fossils reveal not only individual animals, but also the complexity of ecosystems. The Burgess Shale shows us interactions, not just isolated specimens. For decades after Walcott's initial work, the fossils sat in collections, their strangeness underappreciated. It was not until the 1960s and 70s that researchers like Harry Whittington, Derek Briggs, and Simon Conway Marsh revisited the material and recognized just how extraordinary it was. They realized that many Burgess Shale animals did not fit neatly into existing categories. Instead, they represented unique body plans, evolutionary experiments unlike anything alive today. This reevaluation transformed our understanding of the Cambrian Explosion, shifting it from a story of gradual diversification to one of radical innovation. Hallucinia, once reconstructed upside down, became an emblem of the Burgess Shale strangeness. Opabenia with its 5 eyes and proboscis was presented at conferences to both laughter and astonishment. Anomalocaris, once thought to be several different animals, was recognized as the great predator of its age. Each of these stories underscores how the Burgess Shale challenged assumptions and expanded the boundaries of what life could look like. The fossils also highlight how much of evolutionary history is hidden from us. Without sites like the Burgess Shale, we might assume that the Cambrian was dominated only by familiar groups, trilobites, mollusks, and brachiopods. Instead, the Burgess Shale reveals a world filled with creatures that left no living descendants, animals that represent side branches of evolution. They remind us that the tree of life is not a straight path, but a tangled web full of experiments, many of which ended long ago. The Burgess Shale is not the only site of its kind. Similar deposits in China, known as the Xinjiang biota, also preserve extraordinary Cambrian fossils, often even older than those of the Burgess. Together, these sites paint a global picture of Cambrian diversity, but the Burgess Shale holds a special place, both for its historical importance and for the richness of its preservation. For paleontologists, working in the Burgess Shale is like opening a time capsule. Each slab of rock may hold a new species, an unexpected detail, or a clearer picture of a known creature. Splitting the shale layers requires patience and care, and the reward is a glimpse of anatomy frozen in stone for over 500 million years. Even today, more than a century after its discovery, new species continue to emerge from these rocks, showing that the Burgess Shale still has secrets to tell. Beyond science, the Burgess Shale has captured the imagination of the public. Its fossils are often described as alien, and for good reason. The shapes and features of these animals seem otherworldly, and yet they are part of our own history. Early members of the same experiment in life that eventually led to us. To see Opabenia or Hallucinia in stone is to be reminded that Earth has hosted forms of life far stranger than anything we might invent. The Burgess Shale also teaches us about the fragility of preservation. For every Hallucinia fossil, there were countless others that decayed before they could be buried. The record we have is precious precisely because it is rare. Each fossil is a survivor not just of the Cambrian seas, but of 500 million years of geological change. Mountains rose around them, glaciers carved valleys, and yet the impressions remain, waiting for someone to split the right rock at the right moment. In studying these fossils, paleontologists are not just cataloging species, they're reconstructing worlds. The Burgess Shale allows us to walk in imagination across Cambrian seafloors to watch creatures feeding, swimming, and hiding. It allows us to see not only the great predators, but also the small grazers, the filter feeders, and the builders of reefs. It shows us complexity in motion, preserved in quiet detail. And this is why the Burgess Shale is often called a fossil diary. It is not just a record of what existed, but a record of how life interacted, how it looked, how it moved. It is a diary written in stone with each page split open to reveal scenes from an ancient world. As we turn those pages, we glimpse not just the past, but the nature of life itself. Creative, experimental, fragile, and resilient all at once. The Cambrian Explosion is one of the most striking events in the history of life, and the lessons it leaves us about evolution are profound. For billions of years before the Cambrian, life on Earth was mostly microscopic, limited to bacteria, algae, and simple multicellular organisms. Then within a geologically brief span of time, animals with shells, eyes, limbs, and complex bodies appeared across the seas. This sudden flowering of diversity has long fascinated scientists and continues to shape our understanding of how evolution works. The Cambrian tells us that the history of life is not a slow, even march, but a story of bursts, experiments, and turning points. One of the first lessons from the Cambrian is that evolution is both inventive and opportunistic. When environmental conditions allowed, when oxygen levels rose, when nutrients were plentiful, when shallow seas spread across the continents, life responded by branching into new forms. The Cambrian Explosion was not planned or directed, but once the ecological stage was set, natural selection tested countless body designs. Some of these designs were successful and endured, becoming the ancestors of major groups alive today. Others were dead ends, strange experiments that left no descendants, but still demonstrate how wide the possibilities were. The oddities of the Burgess Shale, Hallucinia, Opabinia, Weaxia are reminders that evolution tries many paths, not all of which lead forward. The Cambrian also shows us that complexity emerges through interactions. Predators like anomalous force prey to adapt with shells, spines, and burrowing behaviors. Eyes evolve to spot threats and opportunities, and in turn, animals develop camouflage and armor. This back and forth, sometimes called an evolutionary arms race, fueled rapid diversification. Evolution is not simply about change with an isolated species. It is about the constant web of pressures and responses among all organisms in an ecosystem. The Cambrian is the first clear evidence of this dynamic, and the results shape the entire trajectory of life. Another lesson is that major innovations often open doors for further diversity. The evolution of eyes, for example, did not just make one animal better at seeing. It transformed the balance of predator and prey, leading to cascades of adaptations across many lineages. The appearance of hard shells was not only protection. It created new niches as predators evolved ways to break them, and scavengers took advantage of fragments. Even burrowing had ripple effects, reshaping sediments, changing oxygen flows, and allowing new organisms to thrive. These examples remind us that evolution works in layers. One innovation sparks others, and together they push life into new realms. The Cambrian Explosion also underscores that survival is not always about being the most efficient or advanced. Many of the animals preserved in Cambrian deposits look odd to us, with body plans that seem impractical or clumsy, yet for millions of years they thrived. Evolution is not about perfection. It is about fitting into a niche well enough to persist. When conditions change, what once worked may no longer be viable and entire lineages vanish. The Cambrian world was full of both survivors and failures, and both are essential for understanding evolution. Without the failures, we would not see the boundaries of what life can attempt. For scientists today, the Cambrian also illustrates the importance of exceptional fossil records. Most of the time, soft-bodied organisms leave little trace, and our view of the past is biased toward hard shells and bones. Sites like the Burgess Shale and Chongqing remind us that the fossil record is incomplete and that many of the most important evolutionary experiments may be invisible. When we study the Cambrian, we're not just learning about ancient animals. We're learning about the limits of our own knowledge and how dependent our stories are on the rare accidents of preservation. The Cambrian Explosion further shows us that major evolutionary shifts often require more than just biological potential. Environmental conditions matter deeply. The rise in oxygen levels, the availability of calcium, the flooding of continental shelves. All these geological and chemical changes created the backdrop for biological innovation. Evolution does not occur in a vacuum. It is tied to the Earth itself. The Cambrian tells us that the planet and its life evolved together, each shaping the other in constant feedback. It also warns us against assuming that the future of life is predictable. Looking back, we can see which Cambrian animals became ancestors of modern groups and which faded into extinction. But at the time, there was no clear way to know. Upper Beania might have seemed as likely a candidate for long-term success as early chordates. Yet only one lineage led toward vertebrates while the other vanished. Evolution is shaped by chance as much as by adaptation. Random extinctions, changing climates, and shifting continents all played roles in determining who survived. The Cambrian teaches humility in the face of life's unpredictability. Perhaps most importantly, the Cambrian tells us that diversity itself is a strength. The explosion of forms created not just more species, but more ecological roles. With predators, prey, scavengers, and filter feeders all present, ecosystems became resilient, capable of absorbing change. This resilience is why life persisted through later extinctions and upheavals. Diversity provides options, and in evolution, options are survival. The Cambrian was the moment when life expanded its options dramatically, setting the stage for everything that followed. For those who studied the origins of animals, the Cambrian is both a challenge and a source of wonder. It challenges us to explain why so many forms appeared in such a short time, and it reminds us that our explanations must consider not just biology, but also geology, chemistry, and chance. It fills us with wonder because it reveals how inventive life can be when given the chance. The strangeness of Cambrian creatures is not a curiosity. It is evidence of the raw creativity of evolution. When we look at the Cambrian today through fossils pressed into shale, we are seeing more than ancient animals. We are seeing the principles of evolution in action, experimentation, interaction, innovation, and extinction. We are seeing the roots of our own lineage alongside countless others that vanished. We're seeing a reminder that life is both fragile and resilient, capable of collapsing in one form, but flourishing in another. The Cambrian Explosion is not just a chapter in Earth's history. It is a lesson in how evolution works and why life is the way it is. It shows us that the story of animals is not a straight line, but a branching, twisting exploration of possibilities. It shows us that survival is shaped by both adaptation and chance. And it shows us that the diversity we see today is built on a foundation laid 500 million years ago in seas where trilobites scuttled, sponges anchored, and predators with compound eyes hunted across the shallows. When we study the Cambrian, we're not only looking backward, we're learning how evolution shapes the present and will shape the future. The oceans that once carried Opabinia and Anomalocaris are long gone, but the principles that govern their lives are the same ones that govern ours. The Cambrian tells us that change is constant, that diversity is essential, and that the story of life is always more surprising than we expect. 500 million years have passed since the Cambrian seas rippled with trilobites, sponges, worms, and strange predators with grasping appendages and eyes that glinted like tiny jewels. The oceans themselves are different now. The continents have shifted far from where they once lay, and the air above us carries traces of oxygen that those early organisms helped stabilize. Yet the Cambrian Explosion still echoes through every living thing today. Every fish that swims, every insect that crawls, every bird that flies, and every human who reflects on this history carries the imprint of changes that began in those ancient waters. To understand why it matters is to see that the Cambrian is not some distant curiosity, but the foundation upon which modern life stands. The first echo is in the structure of our own bodies. Before the Cambrian, animals were mostly soft, simple, and limited in form. During the explosion, innovations appeared that remain central to biology today. Skeletons, shells, eyes, jaws, and segmented limbs. The notochord, a flexible rod that gave support to small chordates like pica, became the backbone of vertebrates, eventually leading to fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Without the first modest structure, none of the complexity of vertebrate life, including us, would have been possible. The Cambrian reminds us that even small beginnings can ripple forward into immense consequences. Another echo lies in ecosystems themselves. The Cambrian was the first time that food webs took on shapes recognizable to us. There were predators, prey, scavengers, and filter feeders, all interacting in webs of energy and survival. That balance of roles is still the way ecosystems function today. A lion on the savanna, a shark in the ocean, or a hawk in the sky occupies a place not so different from anomalocaris gliding through Cambrian seas. Herbivores, grazers, and filter feeders fill the middle layers while decomposers and scavengers clean up the remains. The Cambrian was when ecosystems became complex and layered, and that template has lasted ever since. The Cambrian also gave rise to the concept of evolutionary arms races, and that too has never ended. When trilobites evolved hard shells, predators adapted ways to pry them open or flip them over. When eyes developed to detect danger, camouflage and armor appeared as countermeasures. Today, cheetahs and gazelles still run this same race, as do bats and moths, wolves and deer, humans and the diseases that adapt to our defenses. The principle is timeless. One innovation begets another, and the cycle continues. That cycle began in earnest during the Cambrian, and we still live within it. The fossil record of the Cambrian is another echo that matters. It shows us how incomplete our vision of life can be if we only look at what survives. Without rare deposits like the Burgess Shale, we might never know that creatures such as Opabenia or Hallucinia even existed. That realization is a reminder of humility. Just as whole branches of life vanished and left only faint impressions, countless others may have thrived without leaving any record at all. Even today, we are surrounded by species that remain undiscovered, quietly shaping ecosystems without our knowledge. The Cambrian teaches us that our view of life is always partial, and that mystery is part of its richness. There are also lessons about resilience and fragility. The Cambrian explosion was a time of creativity, but it was also a time of extinction. Many of the body plans we see in Burgess Shale fossils disappeared, unable to adapt to shifting environments or competition. Survival was not guaranteed, even in a world of abundance. That message is starkly relevant today as human activity drives extinctions at a pace rivaling ancient mass die-offs. The Cambrian shows us that extinction has always been part of life's story, but it also shows us the value of diversity as a safeguard. The more forms life creates, the greater its chances to endure. That truth remains urgent in our own era. The Cambrian also reminds us of the power of chance. Which animals thrived and which vanished was not entirely determined by superiority. Opabenia did not endure while chordates did, though at the time neither looked like a guaranteed winner. Evolution is not a straight line toward progress, but a tangled web shaped by accidents, opportunities, and environments. This recognition matters today when we reflect on our own species. Humans are not the inevitable outcome of evolution, but one branch among many. A branch that could have been pruned by chance long ago. To know that is to see our existence as both fragile and remarkable. Another way the Cambrian matters is in the inspiration it gives to science and imagination. The creatures preserved in shale look alien to our eyes, and yet they are our own ancestors or distant cousins. Studying them expands the range of what we think life can be. In a world where we search for extraterrestrial organisms, the Cambrian reminds us that strangeness does not require another planet. It has already existed here in the odd spines of Waxia or the five eyes of Opabenia. The diversity of life in the Cambrian is proof that biology can invent forms far beyond what we are used to. The Cambrian explosion also shapes the way we teach and think about evolution. It is a vivid example that evolution can produce dramatic change in relatively short spans of time. That does not mean it was instantaneous. 20 or 30 million years is still a long time. But compared to the billions of years of microbial life before, it was a sudden burst. This perspective helps us understand other moments of rapid change, such as the rise of mammals after the extinction of dinosaurs. The Cambrian shows that when opportunities arise, life can respond with speed and creativity. And then there is the personal echo. Every living thing today carries within it the legacy of Cambrian ancestors. When you flex a hand, you're using bones and muscles derived from a pattern first hinted at in chordates. When you see with your eyes, you're using organs that trace their evolutionary roots to the first compound eyes of trilobites and anomalous. The air you breathe, enriched by oxygen cycles shaped partly by Cambrian ecosystems, sustains you. To live today is to live with the gifts of the ancient world. Whether we think about it or not, the Cambrian also matters for how it shifts our sense of time. It stretches the imagination to picture 500 million years. To imagine seas without fish, without corals, without the familiar shapes of whales or dolphins. To hold a fossil from the Burgess Shale is to bridge the vast distance. To feel in your hand the imprint of a creature that swam before trees, before flowers, before vertebrates even had jaws. This connection to deep time changes how we see our place in the world. We are not separate from history. We are its continuation. The Cambrian is part of our story written long before humans appeared. Finally, the Cambrian matters because it reveals the creativity of life. In those seas, evolution did not merely refine old designs. It invented new ones. Eyes, skeletons, limbs, and complex organs all appeared in variations that became the foundation for the future. The strangeness of those animals is not just an oddity, but a testimony to what life can achieve. It shows us that the potential of biology is vast and that creativity is woven into the fabric of revolution itself. So when we ask why the Cambrian matters today, the answer is simple and profound. It matters because we are living in its legacy. It matters because it shows us the power of diversity, the role of chance, the interplay of earth and life, and the fragility of existence. It matters because it reminds us that what seems strange now was once ordinary, and that what seems ordinary now may one day seem strange to those who look back. The Cambrian is not gone. It is present in every creature, every ecosystem, every moment of life on this planet. And so we drift back from those ancient seas, carrying with us the shapes and echoes of a world 500 million years gone, yet still alive in every movement of the present. If you found this journey through the Cambrian a little calming, a little curious, or simply something to keep you company for a while, feel free to stay connected here. There are always more stories waiting beneath the surface. Until next time, take care of yourself, and thank you for listening.